Welcome back, everybody, to episode 7. No, this isn't episode 7. This is episode 8 of the Movie Nerd podcast because, like I said, we were on hiatus for a while, so it was a little bit difficult there to tell exactly how many episodes we were on. But this is number 2 up here from SUNY Oswego. It is I, the Movie Nerd, a.k.a. Dominic Rizzi, and my partner in crime,
Connor Brennan.
So we're back to talk everything that's going on in the world of movies, news, trailers, movies that we've seen, the usual. I would like to eventually start talking about TV once I can actually get my friend here to, actually watch TV and understand how great it is. No, I'm never going to stop bugging you about that.
Really wish you would.
Well, it's not going to happen because TV is great, and I will eventually get you to understand why. But in the meantime, Connor, before we get into the podcast, we start breaking down everything that happened in the month of November, because believe me, there was a lot that happened in the month of November. You saw 2 movies yesterday. One, which we're going to get into later when we talk about the movies that we've seen of the month, but one, which is a build-up to another little movie that's coming out at the end of this year. It's a cult phenomenon. Connor, tell them what movie you finally saw.
The Room.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, man, this fucking movie is... Oh, it's such an enigma, this movie. I have no idea what makes it work, what makes it so fascinating. It's just because it's such a train wreck of a film. It's like everything that you're not supposed to do concerning filmmaking, and just kind of like give your overall thoughts on it, just like of watching this masterpiece of disaster, whatever the hell it is.
I struggle to believe that the film was actually made by a human being. I mean, nobody talked like real people. I mean, Mr. Tommy Wiseau seemed to not know how to actually make a movie properly. I not only think The Room is the worst film of the 21st century so far, it is the worst film I've ever seen.
Wait, hold on, because Connor's actually been on record a bunch of times here. Are you saying that The Room is worse than Manos, The Hands of Fate?
Yes, I am saying that, because at least with Manos, The Hands of Fate, the director, Harold P. Warren, had some idea of how to make a movie, even with all those dubbing errors and those long unbroken shots and all those other little fuck-ups. But with The Room, it wasn't just technical details and bad acting. Everything was wrong. Everything.
People, we have a new winner. It is official. Connor, a.k.a. Roger Ebert Jr.'s new least favorite movie of all time is The Room. I feel like there should be a round of applause there, but there probably won't be because we have a lot of topics to dive into. So that was one of the worst segues on the planet. But so, as you know, we always start off each of our podcasts with diving into some of the trailers that have been released for the month. And this month, oh man, we have a lot of trailers on the docket right now. I have on the docket 6 trailers right here that I want to get into, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of some of the other trailers that came out this month as well. So the ones that I have on the docket here, we've got Deadpool 2, Rampage, The Incredibles 2, the second trailer for A Wrinkle in Time, Tanya, because I try and get some independents on there in addition to all the big blockbusters that we get, and of course the big one, the one that came out this week, the one that literally broke the internet in a day, broke YouTube's viewing record in a day. That would, of course, be the Avengers Infinity War trailer. But there were a couple of other trailers for some smaller independent movies that came out that I'm currently drawing a blank on, but there was one that I just wanted to give a quick shout out to, and actually this might interest you because that would be John Krasinski's directorial debut, A Quiet Place, starring him and his wife, Emily Blunt. Of course, fans of John Krasinski would know him from his famous role as Jim on The Office, and the reason why I am giving this movie a shout out is because the majority of this movie was actually shot very close to a place where Connor and I grew up. That would be in New Paltz, New York, which is about 40 minutes away from our houses. So when we see this movie, that's going to be quite interesting to actually see scenes that in a big budget blockbuster action movie that were close to our house. So I just wanted to give that movie a quick shout out. So Connor, in starting off this trailer segment, we're going to be covering... This is a trailer for, yet again, from 20th Century Fox. I know last month we covered the New Mutants trailer that was released, and we both definitely enjoyed a lot of the tones and vibe that came out of that trailer. But so this one, it's turning back to the sequel to what is now allowing Fox to enjoy their new reign of rated R movies. And that would, of course, be the trailer for Deadpool 2, which... When that came out, when that hit the internet on Facebook, I remember I was bored out of my mind. I was just surfing on the web on my computer, and I'm on Facebook real quick, and I see a Deadpool 2 teaser. I'm like, oh man, this is another stupid fan-made thing. And then I start watching it, and it's like a Bob Ross impersonation, and I'm like, wait, what am I watching here? And it turns out that this is not only the first teaser-length trailer for Deadpool, it's yet again continuing the genius marketing campaign that was the marketing campaign of the first Deadpool movie, where it's literally like they're not really doing like trailers and your typical marketing. They're just like throwing out random jokes and bits of footage that just have nothing to do with the movie, and it works brilliantly. So I know it got a couple of complaints. I know a couple people that I know were saying that this looked like an Adult Swim sketch rather than an actual Deadpool teaser. But honestly, I'm okay with that, because if you'll actually find Adult Swim and Deadpool's sense of humor actually have quite a lot in common. But Connor, after having viewed this first official teaser for the sequel to Deadpool, what are your thoughts on it?
I'll start off by saying that I have no idea what to expect from Deadpool doing a Bob Ross sketch and just glimpses of all the characters that are going to come back and all the new ones like Domino. I'm kind of wondering if there's going to be a love triangle between Deadpool, Domino, and Vanessa? Yeah, Vanessa. I just hope that it's not going to go back on what Deadpool and Vanessa established with their relationship in the first movie, because if the movie did, then it would be kind of useless.
Especially considering the fact that love motivation, what literally was the motivation for that entire first Deadpool movie, and it's one of the reasons that made that plot so cynical. Is as great as that movie was, the plot broken down like to a T is him just wanting to make himself pretty again so he can be with his pretty girlfriend.
Yes, well, to this day, I still think Deadpool, in terms of plot, it does for superhero movies what Scream did for horror movies, although I think Deadpool did change it up a little in that aspect. But anyway, I am hoping that there's more wackiness in Deadpool 2 compared to the original, which was pretty wacky already. I mean, hopefully Josh Brolin will make a damn good Cable.
Yeah, seriously. Like, Josh Brolin also, knocking it out of the park. I thought that he was just good as Thanos. Next thing you know, no, he's also playing Cable, too, in the Deadpool 2 movie. And I'm like, okay, way to get some work, Josh Brolin. That's great. But, yeah, my thoughts on this are... So, as you know, I was very worried about this movie, especially when I heard that they'd lost Tim Miller as a director with all the, kind of production problems that were going on that we all heard about earlier this year. But I was really glad to hear that they were bringing on David Leitch as a director, because John Wick was one of our favorite movies of 2014, and just the amazingness that we saw with that movie. I definitely need to see more. I gotta actually see the movie before I can really make a determination on just whether this one can hold a candlelight to the first one. The thing is that we did see a couple of glimpses of action, because the way that this teaser starts off, it is the Bob Ross sketch at first, and then it quickly transitions into a really quick series of scenes from the movie itself. A couple action scenes, he's running towards a car. You see a brief glimpse of Domino. No shots of Cable, though. Him making out with Vanessa. Him cocking a gun with T.J. Miller's character, Weasel. You see Blind Al and Dope Ender back. You also see Negasonic Teenage Warhead with a new haircut. I'm glad that they're keeping with, this weird little batch of characters that they established with the first one, because each one of those, got so fully fleshed out, surprisingly enough, in that first movie. And, of course, the thing that is obviously keeping me coming back for this is the fact of, yes, they still have Ryan Reynolds. Yes, it is very clear that he is just as passionate about this as he was the first one since day one. And, of course, you still have the two writers that made that first one as good as it was, Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick. So,
and also, can we take the time to rejoice in the fact that this film, well, according to the teaser, actually seems to be following up on the promise of the first film's post-credit scene of having Cable in there? Movie studios just don't do that all the time.
What, you mean just where the post-credit scene doesn't... what do you mean by that?
Well, the fact that they would just announce so soon that they're going to do a certain thing with a sequel, and they actually follow through with it.
Like give me an example of like what's happened before where it's a studio that says they're going to do something with a sequel and then they don't follow up with it.
Well, let's take, and this isn't a post-credit scene, by the way, let's take the end of Alien vs. Predator. I mean, at the end of that movie, the dead Predator in the spaceship, his chest gets burst open by a xenomorph who looks to be an alien-predator hybrid. And they show exactly that at the beginning of Alien vs. Predator Requiem. I haven't seen the full movie.
Never going to, by the way.
But it's nice to know that they actually decided to have an alien-predator hybrid in the sequel.
Even though the movie itself is the same guys who did Skyline, which from what I heard is one of the worst movies of this decade.
I'm probably fortunate not to have seen that.
Me too, I haven't seen it either. But again, this one friend that I have back home literally did nothing but complain about how terrible that movie was. So I'm like, definitely going to be sitting that one out.
As for an example of a movie announcing that they're going to do something in a sequel, but won't, the end of Halloween 4, The Curse of Michael Myers, and this is going back some time, by the way, it ends with the main character, Jamie Lloyd, the daughter of Laurie Strode from the first film, killing her foster mother while wearing a clown suit, a clown costume, making it look like she's going to be the killer in any future sequels. But in Halloween 5, they bring Michael Myers back, and of course they only say that Jamie Lloyd had a psychotic episode, and that was it. It's never followed up on.
The one thing that I can say is that particular example that you used was, well, not necessarily the Alien versus Predator, because obviously that's always got the sci-fi element to it, but at least with the Halloween example, that's an example of a horror movie, and how many times have specifically horror movie sequels ended, promised something, and then the sequel, of course, doesn't follow up. Because if there's one thing that I've learned from the few horror movie sequels that I have, it's that you can almost never count on the sequel holding up anything from the original. Like, you could never count, after that first movie, you can never count on any sort of continuity between these movies.
Well, the Friday the 13th films were, at least for a time, pretty consistent in their continuity and their franchise quality.
All right, I guess, but I don't know. I'm not the biggest horror aficionado, as I have proved on the last episode. So, but anyways, back to Deadpool. So Deadpool, I'm excited for this movie. I want to see what 20th Century Fox does with this in terms of just like continuing their trend of kind of changing up the genre with these rated R movies. Like, I am going to be really sad if this one is just like your typical sequel and they try to compensate for it by just making fun of themselves the entire time, because I'm like, yeah, that worked once, but you're going to have to do like something really different. Especially what I'm really worried about is if they end up making this story as convoluted as David Leitch's last movie that he did, which was Atomic Blonde, which despite the fact that I did really like that movie's story and plot was convoluted as hell. But again, that just goes back to a writing thing, not necessarily a stylish directorial thing. So that's why I have slightly more faith in this movie than, say, with a situation like Atomic Blonde.
Yes, and speaking of hard R-rated X-Men movies, I'd just like to take a moment to say that there has been talk of James Franco doing a Multiple Man movie that's going to be rated R, which will be interesting because Multiple Man was pretty much useless in X-Men The Last Stand.
Wait, Multiple Man was in X-Men The Last Stand? I thought that was just them getting the guy from Grey's Anatomy to come in and do a quick cameo to advertise the next season of Grey's Anatomy. Right. So that's kind of our coverage of the Deadpool 2 trailer, unless there's anything else you'd like to say. Because, again, it's a quick bit teaser that was just, you could tell, is the beginning of another great advertising campaign. So there's really not too much to say about it in terms of just, like, really breaking it down and figure out, like, what's going to lead into the movie and what isn't. But this next trailer that I want to talk about, oh, man. So this was a trailer. So I watched the leaked version of this trailer before it was officially released the next day. And I watched it without audio in like a bad version of it, and I'm like, this movie looks like one of the silliest, stupidest, most unintentionally hilarious things I may have ever seen. I'm like, this literally looks like an Asylum movie, but with an actual budget to it. And that would, of course, be the next solo outing from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Rampage. Now, Connor, what did you think of this trailer when I showed it to you?
Well, I thought it looked pretty fun. I mean, I would find it hard to believe that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson could play a biologist or a zoologist or a zookeeper or whatever position he was holding related to animals.
Something to do with him talking to gorillas and animals, because we've never seen that before. Also, just think about that for a second. The Rock talking to a gorilla.
But the trailer did advertise Rampage as some B-monster movie fun, and despite my disdain for many of the Godzilla sequels that were so lighthearted when the original movie was so serious, I'm always up for a little B-monster movie fun. To be honest, the film sort of looked like the video games. I ought to know because I owned a copy of Rampage Total Destruction, the third game in the series, and through that I was able to play ports of the original arcade game and Rampage World Tour. Now, one thing I was confused at first, I mean, George and Ralph, the gorilla and wolf, were pretty prominent throughout the trailer. Then I was thinking, one's missing. Where's Lizzie, the third one?
And then she comes up right at the end and, like, the most perfect, like that you could tell that last shot was just them just like, okay, this is going to be our Jurassic World meets Godzilla reveal shot. Yes.
And about that, Lizzie clearly looks like a giant mutated crocodile. And fans of the game will be like, that's not right. She's supposed to be a giant dinosaur. Well, if they can tell that it's Lizzie at all. I was confused at first, but I think I may know the reason why Lizzie looks the way she does in the trailer. Because, I mean, Legendary Pictures is currently making Godzilla movies. Like, I don't know, what studio is distributing Rampage?
I think it's Universal.
Well, if that's the case, then I guess they made Lizzie look like a giant crocodile because they didn't want to get sued for making Lizzie look like a giant dinosaur, which
How would they
of
get
course
sued? It's all the same studio.
Well, Godzilla. Legendary Pictures is doing Godzilla. They're working with Warner Brothers.
But even if it did come up with them being sued, it would still be a situation of, oh, well, we own the dinosaurs and we're making her look like a giant dinosaur because, Jurassic Park. So.
Well, but in the games, don't you think Lizzie looks a bit similar to Godzilla?
I never played the game, so I would not be able to tell you.
That's something I'll have to introduce you to.
Well, consider the fact that I don't play a lot of video games outside of Pokemon. But this movie, this trailer at least, I thought... Oh, well, first off, the opening shot, I'm like, okay, The Rock is talking to a gorilla. There's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to buy into any of this crap. And then so I see Naomi Harris, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is that Rampage movie that I heard about. And then I see him talking to the gorilla, which, first off, that gorilla, can we just talk about that? The gorilla looks so fake. That gorilla, it does not even look like, you could tell that with those opening shots of him talking to the gorilla, like with the sign language, everything, it's really, really obvious that they're trying to capture, like, some sort of element from the Apes movies and how great those were. Like, that was really, really obvious. And so that happens. Then you've got, of course, the green gas mutating it. And then Jeffrey Dean Morgan comes in, literally doing, like, it's almost like an off day for The Walking Dead with him. Like, he's literally doing somehow an even poorer impersonation of Negan from The Walking Dead. And then they bring in the wolf, and then it just goes full-on pandemonium. Like, I'm wondering if, like, there's gonna be a point in this movie where it's like the first half they're gonna take themselves, like, uber seriously, and then for the second half they're just gonna be like, yeah, fuck it, we're fighting giant animals that are, like, destroying Chicago. We're gonna, like, be as silly as possible with this.
Yes, well, one thing I'm always curious about is how The Rock chooses his scripts. Like, I hated Baywatch, which he starred in, of course. I mean, there was just so much wrong with that movie, like so many unfunny jokes. I struggled to comprehend why The Rock would be interested in that project in the first place. And obviously, it wasn't that big a success at the box office.
Well, I think the situation with The Rock is that he's not necessarily, he doesn't have the mentality that most actors do when they're picking scripts. Because, as you know, obviously with his origins in wrestling, and then obviously the type of choices that he's made in terms of his acting career, the way he got started with these, kind of more serious, more grounded action movies in the early 2000s before he got stuck in that Disney contract for the latter half of the 2000s before he finally made his comeback in those Fast and Furious movies. I think he's just at a point in his life right now where he is one of the biggest, if not the biggest movie star in the world. He's going to get any script that comes his way, and if it works somehow within his schedule, he'll do it. Because like I said, with the mentality that comes with being a wrestler versus with being an actor, they're used to that busy on the road 24-hour workday schedule. They are used to very little rest. Like The Rock literally sometimes is shooting like 3 to 4 movies a year, and I don't even know how he does it, but like literally just this year alone he starred in 3 movies, not just Baywatch, but as you guys know, Fate of the Furious, and then he's also got Jumanji 2, Welcome to the Jungle coming out this year, and next year Rampage is not even going to be the only movie that he's in, he's also got another major blockbuster called Skyscraper coming out later on that year, which I believe is directed by the same guy who did 47 Meters Down, Juanmi Colette Serra. This movie, however, Rampage, is directed by Brad Payton, who's the guy who did a success of his that came out 2 years ago in 2015, that of course being San Andreas, which somehow turned out to be one of the highest grossing movies that summer. But yeah, just when it comes to The Rock, he's just in a place in his life right now where he's not necessarily picky of the scripts that comes his way. And of course, like I said, he's going to put his all into it no matter what. So I got to give him some major props there, even if the projects that he picks aren't exactly always the best.
Yes, well, one of the reasons I bring up the question about The Rock choosing his scripts is because, at least for his on-screen persona, I find him similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger in that he seems like an approachable guy despite his big, I don't know, overblown, how do you say it? Like his muscular personality or
Yeah, I was about to
something?
say, it's just his over-enthusiastic personality. Like, he's just got that, like, naturalistic, nice guy attitude around him.
Yes, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was a competitor himself once in bodybuilding. He won the Mr. Olympia award no less than 7 times, yet he chose a lot of his scripts, and the thing is, most of them were good. Like, a lot of his best-known movies are genuinely good, and he worked with really good directors like James Cameron before he was obsessed with Avatar, and John Milius, Conan the Barbarian, and of course John McTiernan, Predator, and Paul Verhoeven, Total Recall. Like, Arnie knew which material would work and knew how to best utilize his persona to fit those movies, to fit his character. With The Rock, I sometimes wonder if he has the same, I don't know, business sense or creative sense that Arnie did.
Well, business sense, I can tell you right now, it's definitely not the same because the way that Arnie and The Rock just treat everything, you could definitely tell there's a different mentality going on in there. I don't necessarily want to break down too much the differences, mostly because I don't know them well enough as people to really understand their psyches, but just in terms of the way that they view movies. The other thing you have to consider is obviously the different time periods that there have been, where he is. Versus back in the 80s when Arnie was pretty prominent, a lot of the projects that he took, he could really tell, you know, what was for kids versus what was something that he was more interested in. And once he became big, he had the creative leeway because the way that movie stars, just the mentality that they had back then was much different than what they have now versus with The Rock, with the way that he views everything. And in the world that we live in today, it's just a matter of he's really gonna do what he wants, and he doesn't necessarily care how that looks because it folds into the kind of the public mindset that is today, which is no publicity is bad publicity. So
Yes, well, as Baywatch proved, though, a movie that has The Rock as its star is not instant box office gold.
So that's kind of our wrap up of our Rampage trailer cover. Like I said, dumb fun. Really I am looking forward to seeing this movie in theaters just for the simple fact of at the best, it'll actually surprise me and be surprisingly good and entertaining. And at the worst, it's just going to be a really stupid movie that I'm going to love, that I'm just going to have an absolute blast seeing. So
I'm personally thinking it'll be the latter.
most likely, but hey, that's still not a bad thing. So moving on from Rampage, the next one that we have, once again, getting into Disney, and more specifically Pixar, because Pixar is now officially kind of owning the fact that this decade has been sequel decade for them. And we got a brief 2-second teaser for a much anticipated Pixar sequel. And that would, of course, be the Incredibles 2 teaser that was about, was it even a full minute?
No, I think the timer said something like 54 seconds?
Yeah, and the point being, it was definitely more so in line, this teaser, with a lot of the previous teasers that I feel like Disney's putting out, where it's like taking the most cute, cuddly thing about it and kind of pushing that front and center, where it shows Jack coming out and kind of just like giving him like every power in the book. and, like, carving out the Incredibles logo before, you just have him being held by his dad, of course, Mr. Incredible, with Craig T. Nelson returning to voice him and accidentally lasering off part of his hair as part of a joke.
Yes, I think how Jack Jack looks here, it brings up an immediate question. How many years after the first Incredibles does this take place? Because at the end of the first movie, we see them preparing to battle a new villain, and then it just cuts to credits. So what have they been doing all this time?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Brad Bird has said that this movie is going to take place almost immediately after the first one. Like, it's going to pick up with them fighting the Underminer. That's how this new movie is going to start off. I'm still looking forward to this because, like I said, of all the Pixar movies that we got sequels to, this was the one that I would like, okay, this one would actually warrant a sequel, because after Toy Story, there are only 2 other Pixar movies that I would even want to see sequels to, and that would, of course, be, besides The Incredibles, I would actually like to see a sequel to Inside Out, just to see, like, what those emotions are going through when Riley actually hits, like, high school, just to see, like, what's going on inside of her head. That would actually be interesting to me. But, like, with all the garbage sequels that we've gotten this decade, Cars 2 and 3, Monsters University, Finding Dory, and then, of course, with just the 2, like, really, also, even their original movies are starting to become downers, because after the disappointments of both Brave and The Good Dinosaur, I personally found Coco, their newest outing, to be extremely, extremely disappointing, but for different reasons than some of their other movies. It's really sad to me, and has given me a lot of despair, knowing that one of the pinnacles of my childhood growing up, that, of course, being Pixar Animation, has only churned out 2 great movies this decade. Mind you, they have been 2 of the best movies we've gotten this decade, but the point being that it would really suck if the sequel to one of their best movies, The Incredibles, still the best Fantastic Four movie we've ever gotten on the big screen, turned out to be yet another one of these mediocre byproduct studio-mandated sequels.
Oh, let me say that I liked Coco better than my best friend. Anyway, I have not seen most of the Pixar movies from the 2010s. I've seen more of their original content from the 2000s. And, of course, the late 90s. Yes, even A Bug's Life.
No, A Bug's Life is actually pretty good. It's just the movie's not an original story, but it still has good characters and really good voice work.
Out of the 2010s Pixar movies I've seen, well, besides Toy Story 3, which of course was great, as we both know, the only other one was Monsters University, which of course was a prequel to Monsters, Inc., not a sequel. I'm kind of wonder how they would have done a sequel, but anyway. What I thought about Monsters University after watching it a few times was it actually just seemed like a typical college movie. Like all the cliches. You have the bullies who really are just cartoons. You have the outsiders, the outcasts who want to mean something. And then it has a final competition, which is present in a lot of college and high school movies, any of those. But I think what saved it somewhat was its final act, in which Mike Wazowski, wanting to be a scarer, realizes he just isn't that scary, and then Sully opens up about his personal demons as well. That was something new. Of course, I'm also annoyed at the fact that they didn't follow continuity with in the first Monsters, Inc., them Mike and Sully saying that they knew each other since elementary school, and now it looks like they just met in college. Well, sometimes prequels ignore continuity to tell a good story. Yeah, I was about to say, granted,
there is also a 12-year difference between the movies, and if you actually expect the people at Pixar to remember continuity when it comes to sequels, yeah, that might be asking a little bit much.
Yes, but still, I watched interviews with some of the filmmakers, and they actually created or storyboarded at least scenes where Mike and Sully, they met each other in elementary school. They say they couldn't come up with a story to properly, follow up on what Mike and Sully said in the first movie.
But the point being that this was the Incredibles 2 teaser. It's barely even a teaser. There's really nothing to talk about, because again, it is just Jack Jack. So we can really only just talk about the history of Pixar and really what we have left from them for these last 2 years of the decade. So obviously, besides I think Incredibles 2 and Toy Story 4 are the only ones that we're going to get next from Pixar this decade, only because I know that from D23, that Pixar is also working on a new original movie, but I don't think that's set to come out until 2020. However, I will say that in continuing with my suspicions that this entire decade is a repeat of the 90s, I'm hoping that holds true, and that next decade is a repeat of the 2000s, which will hopefully get Pixar back to its creative roots and get us some amazing new creative original stories.
Yes, and also, Can I just get back to the thought of the teaser advertising the whole cute aspect? Because it really doesn't surprise me that a lot of Pixar movies seem to be doing that lately, because Disney bought Pixar some time ago. And, of course, Disney is all about cute stuff for kids. At least I think. That's the impression I get. That's what happened with Monsters University. I mean, if you compare the look of that world to the world of Monsters, Inc., the world of Monsters, Inc. looked less cute. The monster designs were actually cool, and it seemed to be lived in, like it was a working city that just happened to have monsters living in it. In Monsters University, you had a bunch of cute monster designs, like more fluffy ones, and it was brighter than the world in Monsters, Inc.
All right, that's actually an interesting take that I didn't think about. But yeah, that's actually a stigma that I found in a lot of Pixar's movies now, thinking back, is that Pixar obviously has gotten the stigma of designing these amazing worlds that completely suck you in. And it really annoys me that Cars gets so much criticism for creating that type of a world, when all the other Pixar movies, they kind of just get glazed over. But yeah, and that's the thing that I find that not a lot of Pixar movies have done this decade, is because so many of them are sequels and not really original stories. We don't really get those amazing new creative worlds, like a world where your toys come to life, or a world where you have an entire other dimension with monsters working in cities, or a world where you have robots in the future like WALL-E, or this entire other world where you literally have like an entire generation of people, part of whom are superheroes. Pixar was known. The reason why Pixar was so great for so many years is because they created these. They didn't just create great characters, great settings, and have great visual effects and animation. They created these worlds and that were interesting and that sucked you in. And that's something that's really been missing from a lot of their animation this decade. So that's kind of the wrap up of the Incredibles 2 trailer. Now we move on to another big Disney one, and this is one that, oh man, I don't necessarily want to talk about this as much as you would think, only because with a lot of trailers that I've seen so far from this movie, it's not interesting me, because the trailer that I'm talking about is A Wrinkle in Time, which is the next movie from Ava DuVernay, who of course knocked it out of the park 3 years ago with Selma, the Martin Luther King biopic. But now we're getting into Disney live action that is not Marvel or Star Wars, and the problem is, because Disney has kind of settled into the whole money-making trend and kind of focused a lot of their original ideas more so in their animated worlds, I feel like their live-action originals have kind of suffered for it, because Tomorrowland, which was a movie that I was very, very much looking forward to when that movie came out 2 years ago in 2015, was a massive disappointment in my eyes for a variety of different reasons. And I'm worried, after having seen this new trailer for A Wrinkle in Time, that it's going to kind of do the same thing, where it's a lot of CGI that's being thrown in your face, and it's going to try and experiment with elements of science that may seem feasible, but in the end, it's just going to seem very kid-friendly, very dumb. The plot-wise, something is going to go extremely conveniently for the characters, and I have a really bad feeling that these kid actors do not look even a little bit good, which really sucks, because the movie has some really impressive talent in it. Chris Pine, Zach Galifianakis, Mindy Kaling, Michael Pena, Reese Witherspoon off her hot streak from Big Little Lies, and of course, somehow, Disney getting Oprah Winfrey back for one of their live-action movies.
Oh, wait, getting her back? Like what other one did she do?
Well, not necessarily back for one of theirs, like for Disney. I'm just talking like getting Oprah back into movies. Like, of all the movies that I know that she did a voiceover for The Star, that animated movie about the coming of Jesus that came out last month. The point being, she hasn't acted in movies in a while, and it's like, this is the one that gets her back.
Yes, well, and compared to her big on-screen credit for The Color Purple, that is a good question. She was absolutely fantastic in The Color Purple. It's a great performance, and she was actually nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, and from what I heard, like rightfully so. But the point being that, in terms of the Wrinkle in Time trailer, I want it to be good. I want it to experiment with methods of science and actually give us something new that we haven't seen before. But it's just, I don't think that that's going to happen. And like I said, a lot of big fake-looking CGI, a lot of things that we've seen before, like, oh, there's that utter darkness that's shapeless, nameless darkness that's overtaking everything, and Zach Galifianakis, it looks like they're just going to use him for a lot of really bad humor, and just Reese and Mindy especially, like, I can already tell that the writers, they're going to try and have them do some really dumb, over the top, like overly girly things, and that they're gonna come off as cartoon characters, and it's just I'm worried about this movie. I am not looking forward to this even a little bit. This trailer has definitely not gotten me as stoked as I would have liked to be for a movie like this.
And also, I have little knowledge of the material that this movie is based on, so the trailer really left me with little to say. I mean, it looks visually interesting in places, but that's it.
Yeah, so not a whole lot of a big discussion on Wrinkle in Time, but so moving on to the next trailer is for a movie that's actually coming out this year, and that would be for one of the big critically acclaimed movies that got rave reviews coming out of festivals. That is most likely going to be the one that finally gets Margot Robbie her Oscar nomination. That would be I, Tanya, the infamous story of Tanya Harding, the skater who ended up plotting to, what was it? She plotted to kill her husband or something like that?
Well, that's what the trailers made it look like.
Like, I'm not very familiar with the story of Tanya Harding, but that's what gets me interested in movies like this, is us learning something about these real-life crazy people that we never would have thought about. And that's what, of course, has led to some of the best biopics of all time. But this movie, I think, looks great. It's from director Craig Gillespie, who I believe is the same guy who directed Lars and the Real Girl, although I'm not sure about that. Somebody might have to fact check me, but I think Robbie looks absolutely stunning in this movie, mostly just for the simple fact of it's like this looks like just a completely different type of a performance for her. But for me, at least, the scene stealer was of course an actress who is very near and dear to my heart because she's been so good for so many years, and because she's on one of my favorite TV shows of all time. That would, of course, be Allison Janney as her mother, who is also being slated to, they're pushing her for supporting actress, and it definitely looks like she is most definitely going to get a nomination and quite possibly a win. So I'm very, very much looking forward. Connor, what were your thoughts on this trailer, I, Tanya?
All I thought was that it looked like a film that was going to get into some dark places. Now, I am sort of familiar with Margot Robbie's screen career, although I am ashamed to say the only feature-length movie of hers I've actually seen was Legend of Tarzan, which she played Jane, and she was given some pretty boring dialogue, and she was just a damsel in distress.
Definitely disappointed to see after she broke out and after how good she was in Wolf of Wall Street, having to see her go through Suicide Squad, Legend of Tarzan. I know there was that Tina Fey movie that she was in either last year or the year before, but I don't think anybody saw that, so, and I didn't see it, so really can't comment on that. But I'm really hoping that this is the one that finally gets her the awards recognition that she deserves, because I was so angry after she didn't get any awards nominations for Wolf of Wall Street. But hopefully, if this is the one that finally gets her Oscar nomination, that would make me really happy. It's just the Best Actress category this year is so stacked between all, like this year, the amount of critical praise that they are, just the sheer amount of lead female performances. It makes me really, really happy to see that many. Not just the fact that they're giving this many lead roles to females, but also the fact of just the sheer amount of it's not your typical female performances. It really is like shaking up, like Frances McDormand for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which I just saw, like what it looks like they're going to do for Jessica Chastain for Molly's Game, which I cannot wait for, like Sally Hawkins for Shape of Water, like Margot Robbie for I, Tanya, and just it makes me really, really happy to see this many amazing female performances. So I, Tanya, definitely looking forward to that one, definitely hoping that one's going to get a lot of critical acclaim. But Connor, let's move on to the big one, the one that's going to wrap up our trailer discussion, and also the Mac Daddy Kingpin that was just, you knew once you heard this trailer was coming out, it was going to blow literally every single other trailer out of the water. And it would be the trailer that broke the YouTube viewing record in a day. It was a trailer that even Marvel came out and congratulated us and said, thank you for being the best fans in the world. We understand you've been waiting for this trailer, and we finally got it. And that's, of course, the trailer for the Avengers Infinity War. And so I watched the leaked footage from D23, and I've now, after having seen this full trailer, I think I've watched it 6 times now since it was released. And, oh man, I'm pumped for this movie.
So am I. I mean, it looks so epic, and there's going to be a lot of superheroics, clearly. The fact that it includes nearly every single Avenger that's been in the movie so far.
Just the sheer fact that following up, not only are the Russos going to be able to follow up on the success of Civil War, but also just it just Marvel. They keep doing this to DC every single time. DC thinks they have a win on their hands. Marvel just comes out and one-ups them in like 3 seconds without even trying. But oh man, this trailer, like, obviously just hearing as soon as I heard the Alan Silvestri theme song come back, I was like, oh man, this is what has been missing from all of their movies. Like, obviously I feel like it's a movie that we definitely should have gotten like almost like immediately after Civil War, but at the same time, just seeing the amount of heroes that are going to be in this, seeing the build up to it, just how far it's been, just processing in my mind that it has been 10 years since that first Iron Man movie kicked off this whole MCU and all the amazingness that's come with it. It truly is what I feel is going to be one of the last major movie events, and I can't wait for it, because it's actually, like you said, you were telling me that one of the biggest problems that we've had with a lot of the Marvel movies that have come out both in this year and since Civil War and just in general is that Marvel movies, because they seem to be following that formula, they obviously seem to have a lack of stakes because they're always building up to the next movie, to the next movie, to the next movie. But Infinity War, if we're to be believed, this is it. This is everything that they have been building up to over these last 10 years, over these last 2 phases. So,
but yes, it does look like a culmination of everything that's been going on since the first Iron Man. And of course, this is only part 1 of a 2-part story, so we're not even going to get the full range of excitement.
Well, remember, they kind of got rid of the whole part 1, part 2 thing after the Allegiant disaster, so they're trying to kind of avoid that, but we are definitely gonna, my suspicion is still that in Thanos, this movie is only gonna be Thanos' search for the Infinity Stones, and obviously he's gonna wreck a lot of shop along the way, but I definitely don't think we're gonna see the full brunt and effect of the powers until he gathers all 6 of them, which by the end, because the thing to keep in mind is that, remember, we still only have the location of 5 of the stones. We don't know where that 6th stone is.
Yes, that is true, and of course everyone's been talking about how much damage Thanos can do with only 2 stones in his gauntlet, and when he gets all 6, who knows what could happen. He is
going to be a force to be reckoned with. And can we just say, I know that there's been a bunch of complaints about Brolin as a CG character that is like, oh, why can't you just put him in face and makeup? Let me tell you something. This CG in this trailer, with all the complaining that I've been doing about seeing all the just gluttonous amounts of CG that have been used in almost every major blockbuster that I've seen this year, this CG looks pretty freaking fantastic. I would definitely say, like, not just for trailer CG, but just in general. It looked smooth. It looked crisp. Everything, not one thing in there obviously looked fake because they're aliens, but it looked like they were all interacting. Obviously, it still had that prestige sheen that is on every major movie now to make it look good, but it gave me a sense of wonder and hope and dread just to see what is going to happen to all the guys, especially the original crew that's been around from the beginning, because we know that a majority of their contracts are up after this one. So,
and also, why don't we just look at the whole lack of stakes thing and look at how many things that happened in the previous MCU films, like they're gonna take those back in Infinity War. Like, there's talks of Thor getting his eye back after Thor Ragnarok. Captain America looks like he's gonna get his shield back. Bucky's going to be taken out of cryo-freeze. So, I don't know, were all the other chapters, like, it implies that they were all meaningless until Infinity War or something.
Well, I mean, that's kind of been the thing of ever since, and it's one of the reasons why I've had such a problem with Phase 3, is that Phase 3, even more so than Phases 1 and 2, because at least with Phases 1 and 2, it felt like they were building towards something with their respective kind of end-all, be-all movies. It's the fact of Phase 3, just every single movie has felt completely meaningless and just more like holdover, because we were so much closer to Infinity War than we were before, but just seeing... Obviously, it's going to see a payoff to a franchise that has been going on for almost a decade now, but it's also just the way that this movie is playing out and with everything that's happening in the MCU. It's one of the few things where everything that we saw in this trailer, it feels deserved. You know, like hearing the score, seeing those guys again, and everything that they did in that trailer. Everything feels... I don't want to keep repeating myself and saying deserve, but it feels in a way, this trailer made me feel in a way that I don't think any other Marvel trailer has made me feel in a very, very long time, and I'm really excited for it because not just actual scenes, but just like seeing some of that imagery, seeing my favorite shot in the entire trailer is, of course, Captain America, Black Widow, Black Panther, War Machine, Falcon, Bucky, and the Hulk running with the Wakandan army and seeing them fighting together, seeing that Hulkbuster come down, just seeing the amount of like whatever the heck that thing that Black Panther like clawed in the face, like some sort of a morph. Ironically enough, it looks like they brought back the mixes from Alien versus Predator with that army that they were fighting. But seeing Thor, obviously they say the shot of Thor with the Guardians till the end of the trailer, because in the leaked D23 footage, Thor meets them. Like that whole first segment of the trailer is Thor meeting up with the Guardians. Seeing Spider-Man obviously in that Iron Spider suit. Seeing Tony and Bruce with Doctor Strange and Wong. Just all these different little meetups that we have all over the place. To see them all come together, it really makes me excited. And obviously, oh man, I really think Brolin as Thanos might be the best villain. Like I'm talking possibly better than Loki.
Well, let's hope his character is actually worth the damn, because in the previous movies that he's appeared, all he's done is wait in space or sit down in his big comfy chair. And of course, at the mid-credit scene of Age of Ultron, he says, "I'll do it myself."
Finally puts on the goddamn glove. But honestly, you think that chair looks comfortable? That giant hub of rock?
I was half serious.
Yeah, Thanos is a guy who has kind of been built up. Obviously, they've been building him for a reason, and they've kept him, like, literally not doing anything. He's literally the guy in the chair, the mastermind, the manipulator, who's finally going to step up and finally just saying, okay, enough with this shit, time to wreck shop. I'm just hoping that they are able to deliver and really show him wrecking shop. Obviously, like I said, a big thing that everybody's been freaking out about is finally seeing Spider-Man actually use his spider sense. But I'm just thinking, like, man, what a way to jerk off Sony if Marvel ends up killing this version of Spider-Man in this movie.
And plus, about Thanos, Marvel, please don't make him a joke like you did with Ultron.
Yeah, that's the thing that I noticed, is that this trailer, obviously as great as it was, there were no jokes in it. Like none at all. And that makes me both happy and worried, because it's like, okay, this could either mean that this movie is finally going to be a movie that doubles down and starts taking things seriously, or this could be another Age of Ultron situation where it's like we get an uber serious, amazing trailer at first that's followed up by quip, joke.
Yes, and the other two Avengers movies, they've both been good despite whatever flaws they may have. I just hope they're going to keep that consistent franchise quality.
Yeah, and the thing that I will say is that even with all the problems that they've had with their solo movies, Marvel has usually been consistent when it comes to their big team-up movies, because all of our problems with the big team-up movies aside, those usually have been the strongest and the most consistent ones, because despite the fact all the crap that everybody gives Age of Ultron, I still think that Age of Ultron is a solid movie on its own. The movie had so much riding against it, and the fact of the matter is them having Joss Whedon literally doing the exact same thing plot-wise. That's the biggest thing that everybody holds against Age of Ultron, is the fact of it literally did the exact same thing the first one did, just all the flaws that were in the first one that everybody overlooked because they were just so blindsided by seeing these epic heroes on screen for the first time. Now that because they were seeing it a second time and the magic wasn't there that second time, they were starting to notice it. But clearly with Infinity War, that is not the situation, because this is literally this is the end. This is it. Like all these guys, they know that they're fighting for the end. Like if they don't do it now, this is it.
Oh, and also, personally, I'm starting to think maybe we should call this Avengers 4, since Civil War felt more like Avengers 3. But anyway, I mean, Kevin Feige and most of the cast, they've been hyping this up as so different from the other MCU films, and of course they're promising character deaths this time. Maybe, I don't know, maybe like they were doing the same thing with a lot of their previous installments, only to shock us with Infinity War and Avengers 4, like maybe do a big, ha, you didn't see that coming, or something like that.
And I've made fun of Kevin Feige so much in the past for always playing it safe, never really taking any risks, also never being really clever or creative with his movies in a way. But honestly, if they can pay it off here, I may be willing to forgive all the grievances that I've had with Phase 3 so far. So fingers crossed that this movie manages to live up to the hype that this trailer has set, because I am super mega excited. Like, I was already excited for this movie, but this trailer has me quite possibly even more excited now than I ever could have been before. So yeah, here's to Infinity War, and hopefully, that Sylvester theme, just hearing that theme song was So nice to hear. So nice to hear. So that's kind of the end of our trailer segment where we've covered all of the major trailers that were released this month. So now we're going to be getting into some news. Like I said, definitely not going to talk as much about the news story that hit us last month because obviously the news story last month just kind of really spelled... that was a news story that really kind of took a piece of my soul off. So I'd rather talk about something that is much, much happier and brighter. And that would, of course, concern my favorite director of all time, Quentin Tarantino, and his next movie, which he made the announcement almost a year ago, I want to say now, where he decided that his next movie was going to be a coverage. Tarantino's kind of changed his mind a lot about what he said this movie's going to be about. Like, first he said it was going to be about Manson, then he said no, it's going to focus more on Sharon Tate's murder and the build up to her death and all the factors that are going to go into it, almost like an Inglourious Basterd situation. Then he even changed it again and said, no, we're actually going to do it like all about the year 1969, and this is just going to be like a facet of like the culmination of what happened that year. So Tarantino kind of needs to make up his mind about what the movie's actually going to be about. But the point being, Tarantino was a guy who, at this point, for me at least, can do no wrong. And also, it's like every time he says he's going to do a movie, it's like, I don't even care what it's about. Just sign me up. Get me tickets now. Let me see whatever is going to be. Because if there's one thing that I've learned about the man, it's that whatever comes out of his brain, at least in my opinion, is quite possibly as close to genius as you can possibly get. And Connor can actually vouch for me because I finally showed this man Inglourious Bastards the other night. And Connor, just give a quick summation of what you thought of Inglourious Bastards.
Well, safe to say, I loved it. I mean, it was funny. I mean, the dialogue was great. There were actually more references to German and Nazi culture than I imagined there would be. Tarantino seems to have a knack for history. Yeah. And also his references to past movies and film history, and also the characters, like Christoph Waltz as Hans Lada.
Fucking terrifying.
Yeah, I almost thought my stomach hurt in nearly every scene he was in. I thought my heart was going to give out.
Yeah, but of course, we can't forget Brad Pitt as Lieutenant Aldo Raine, who is quite possibly, like, that's the thing. I've never once in a million years thought that, because I saw Django Unchained before I saw Inglourious Basterds, so that's how I was introduced to Christoph Waltz, and I loved him in that. But I hadn't really been familiar with Brad Pitt, at least at the point where I saw, like, obviously I knew who Brad Pitt was, but I hadn't seen, like, the quality caliber of work from him that I saw in his performance in Inglourious Basterds, and he is just amazing in that movie. But with this new movie, Tarantino, like, there's been so much news circling around that, like, with this Manson movie at least. Like, he said for the role of Sharon Tate, basically, in a quick breakdown, like, in sort of a summary of what this movie's going to be about, this movie is going to be set in the year 1969, and it is going to involve the Manson cult leading up to the Sharon Tate murder. He was circling around Margot Robbie for the role of Sharon Tate. I know that he was also considering Jennifer Lawrence, and he's also circling around and trying to write parts for such actors as getting Brad Pitt back, Leonardo DiCaprio, Samuel L. Jackson, and actually one of the newer ones that came out about last month was that he was actually circling Tom Cruise as well for a role in this movie, which, if Tarantino can get the type of performance out of Tom Cruise that I've seen him give in movies like Tropic Thunder, oh man, sign me up. But then there was also, as you guys also know, and this is where last month's news story kind of plays in, there was the fact of, obviously, the Weinstein case forced Tarantino to take his movie elsewhere in order to be funded, because obviously the Weinstein Company, which has basically funded every single one of his movies, is obviously no longer a factor. So the news story, I guess, that we're trying to get to is the fact of Tarantino's new movie landed at Sony. It was a big deal that was circling between 3 studios. It was Sony, Warner Brothers, and I think Legendary might have been the third one, but the point being, all of these studios were banking on him. Like, they gave him the full treatment. Like, I read one story that apparently Warner Brothers had set up like an entire conference room that was styled after the 60s with like 60 cars and everything. Like, because Tarantino's the kind of guy who he can really come in and literally ask for anything that he wants, and any studio will give it to him. Now, I know my friend here has a little bit of apprehension concerning the fact that his new movie is now running at Sony, and for obvious reasons, considering that Sony has been responsible for some of the, let's say, worst movies that have come out both this year and in the last couple of years.
Yes, like the RoboCop remake, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 sex tape, and that's all just 2014. Also, the Emoji Movie.
Which you still haven't seen that, right?
No, I haven't, but God, you know what? I don't want to. And you not even on my worst day can you make me see that.
Oh, I'm not trying to make you watch it. I had no desire to see that. I was the one that was constantly telling you to stop focusing on that movie because it was bad for your health focusing on a piece of shit movie like that.
Well, I just wanted to see it fail because I know, yeah, I'm going to get judged for thinking so poorly about a movie like that before seeing it, but I maintain to this day that emojis, that's a terrible idea for a film.
Lucky for us that apparently nobody else thought that because the movie tanked at the box office, and rightfully so.
Well, not exactly tanked because the film has grossed like $200 million and only cost...
Come on!
Never mind, I don't want to talk anymore.
Let's not talk about that stupid fucking movie, but the point being that I'm just so happy that we're getting the next Tarantino movie like sooner rather than later, because I thought that we were going to have to wait like another 3 to 4 years before we saw this movie, and just hearing that the movie is going to be like what it is about, just because after seeing what he did with Inglourious Basterds, kind of like his sort of bizarre twist on real life events, just seeing what he's going to do, like honestly I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up like turning Sharon Tate into like an axe murdering like megalomaniac who like kills all of Manson's followers when they come into the house to kill her. I know that that's not at all what's going to happen, but just like as something bizarre that Tarantino would do like that, but just like just the idea of seeing people like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, and Leonardo DiCaprio all in a Tarantino movie, and considering the fact that Tarantino is one of the directors who has actors in his movie that, in my opinion, has never given a bad performance. Like I said, you have Maria de Medeiros in Pulp Fiction, but she's barely in that, so it makes little to no difference at all. And of course, that was also the big factor, which is that it landed a release date now for August 9th, 2019, which was, of course, a week before my 22nd birthday. So naturally, that makes me even more stoked for this movie than I already was.
And I've actually done a bit of research about the Manson murders, so I do have some background on that. And I am especially appalled by the Sharon Tate murders, and I especially know about that because I know a lot about New Hollywood, and Roman Polanski was a big New Hollywood director, and Rosemary's Baby was released the year before Sharon Tate was murdered. I wonder if her murder was one of the things that caused him to just go crazy and do the horrible things he did.
Now, just a quick poll if I am throwing this out there. So with a movie that's going to be about the Sharon Tate murders and the Manson cult, you obviously know that Charles Manson is going to have a figure in there. Now, do you think that with Manson's actual involvement in the film, do you think that he is going to actually be a character and serve a major plot role in this movie, or do you think that Tarantino is kind of going to relegate him to what he did with Hitler in Inglourious Basterds, where he's only in a few select scenes?
I don't know what they're going to do, of course, but I hope he's just not just going to be a side character. I don't know, Manson feels like the kind of character that or person that Tarantino would want to explore.
Well, the thing about his movies is that even with the side characters in Tarantino's movies, of all the Tarantino movies you've seen, have you ever seen a Tarantino side character that has let you down in any way, shape, or form? Like Inglourious Basterds being the most recent example. Like that's a movie comprised entirely of supporting characters because there is no one overall definitive lead in that movie.
Well, when Tarantino played a character himself in Pulp Fiction, that was a little less than thrilling. And also a little uncomfortable given his dialogue.
Yeah, Tarantino is definitely a guy who needs to not drop the N-word as often as he does. Like, he takes a little bit too many liberties when it comes to using that word.
And also in Reservoir Dogs, he was one of the 6 that was hired.
Reservoir Dogs. Okay, I can give you Pulp Fiction, but Reservoir Dogs, he's in that for all of about 2 seconds. He makes big monologue about Like a Virgin. He makes one joke about the nickname that he's given, and then he gets shot and he's out of the movie. So Reservoir Dogs, you can't count.
Well, no, I don't count that, but I'm just saying that exactly what you're saying. He was barely in it, and of course he gets killed off, and then it's just the rest of the men.
Right, but so besides Tarantino's cameos in his movie, again, I reiterate, have you ever seen a supporting player in a Tarantino movie that bothered you or just seemed there for the sake of taking up space rather than, like, that didn't interest you or enthrall you in some way?
I guess not. It's safe to say.
Yep, especially with, like, just think about it, like, in Inglourious Bastards, besides, obviously, the main three that are, of course, Shoshana, Aldo, and Londa. Think of, like, the Bear Jew, Stiglitz, Zoller, what's her name? Von Hammersmark. Like, all these amazing support, like, Archie Heacox, Michael Fassbender in his first major breakout role. Like, all of these amazing supporting players that in any other movie you could tell would literally just be bit parts that are just there to take up space. But with Tarantino, no, he makes sure every single one of his characters, even the ones that you don't necessarily know the actors' names of, have a distinct part.
Yes, you're also forgetting Mike Myers, who was a British general, and of course this was before he pretty much disappeared from the movies.
Mike Myers, the German guy who ends up causing the bar shootout when he sees through Fassbender's facade. What's his August Deal is the actor's name. The guy who plays, oh my God, why can I never remember his name? Dr. Goebbels, that guy. Just literally so many amazing supporting players.
True. And, my best friend here is a bit more knowledgeable about Tarantino than I am, but still, I think it's safe to say this will be a pretty interesting project.
So that's kind of the end of this first segment of the podcast. We're going to take our little break here, and then once we come back, we will be diving into the superhero movies of 2017 and what we thought about it. We'll see you guys when we get back. And we are back. This is the second half of episode 8 of the Movie Nerd podcast with, of course, myself, the Movie Nerd, and Connor, which we still have to come up with a nickname for you, but we'll do that eventually.
Well, I thought you already had Roger Ebert Jr.
We do, but I don't know. There's something about that doesn't flow off the tongue as well, so might have to come up with something else. But the point being, so for the second half of this episode, so we've talked about news, we've talked about trailers. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast, which is the movies itself. Now, as you guys know, we are living in an oversaturation period of superhero movies right now. And as you guys probably also know, in the year of 2017 alone, we had a lot of friggin' superhero movies. We had 8 superhero movies in total, whether that be based off comic books, whether that be original content. The point being, we have a lot of superhero movies, and since Justice League came out this month, that marked the last official superhero movie that was released for the year of 2017. So what Connor and I are going to be doing for this segment is we are going to be breaking down and doing our individual rankings of each and every superhero movie that came out this year, starting from the bottoms, our very worst, to our number 1 favorite. And I will say before we start that we do have the exact same number 8s and number 1s. Connor, you have anything you want to say before we jump in?
Mm-hmm. I think it's safe to say, given what Hollywood is doing now, that none of the superhero movies this year are original content.
You know, actually, now that you think about that, you're actually right. I don't think, none of the superhero movies had any original content, which is really sad. So let's jump in. So obviously starting at the bottom of the list, our number 8s. And like I said, we have the exact same number 8. And that would, of course, be a movie that Connor just saw last night that we both had, that I saw months ago when it was released back in March, that we both had some very extreme disdain for. And that would be Power Rangers, the new gritty, realistic reboot that was going to see the 5 teenagers with attitude brought into the modern day to fight against a whole new bevy of terrible-looking CG effects and a really, really terribly overacting Elizabeth Banks. So, Connor, you actually saw this movie for the first ever time last night, and what did you think of the immense amazingness that was the Power Rangers cinematic outing?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying that turning it into a gritty reboot was pretty pointless. I mean, not just the fact that Power Rangers is not the kind of material that you can just turn gritty and expect to work, but also the fact that really the film doesn't really apply anything that would be associated with a gritty reboot and utilize it to its full potential. I mean, the film brings up problems that each of the Rangers have with their families, like Jason having an emotional disconnect with his dad and Zach having a sick mother, but really not much is done with those problems.
Yeah, they almost feel like afterthoughts that are just like there to set up their attempt at character, and then they end up doing nothing with them. Like, for me, the biggest like unintentional laugh that I got from that movie is the scene where they're all sitting around the campfire and Zach just stands up and it's just like, my name is Zach and my mom is the best, but she's also low-key sick. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, that is a little odd. And also, I do want to know why Jason starts off as such a douchebag, bringing a cow into the gym, I guess?
Well, here's the thing that confuses me is that when you do say that he starts off as a douchebag, I don't get the sense that he's a douchebag per se, just an idiot. Like, the whole cow thing, obviously, that's just a setup for a really poorly timed dick joke. But honestly, I actually thought that the guy who played Jason and Jason was himself, the actor, of course, being Dacre Montgomery, actually was one of the highlights of the movie. I thought he actually did a pretty good job, and he actually had one of the more fully fleshed out arcs in the movie.
Well, the actors were okay, I think. I think they had good chemistry, and probably my favorite of the bunch, though, was Billy, because, one of the reasons being that he's an autistic character, and I think, based on personal experience, I think was a fairly accurate portrayal.
Yeah, Billy was definitely the stand-up for me, but I also love R.J. Kyler as an actor on his own. He has been spectacular in everything that I've seen him in. And what I will say that this movie does have going for it is that at least for the first half, when they're sort of taking themselves seriously, like I said, the chemistry between the teens is definitely what gets you through most of the movie before you get to that horrific third act. My biggest problem with this movie is just the fact that it ends up being a whole build-up, not a build-up to nothing. It's the fact of they spend so long in the training, and the movie can't really decide whether it wants to be this kind of weird, gritty Breakfast Club reboot or an actual episode of the Power Rangers, and it tries to do the best of both worlds, and it comes out like in this really bad tonal shift that shows a lot, especially whenever Elizabeth Banks comes on screen, because the thing is that whereas everybody else is acting like they're in whatever this movie is trying to be, Elizabeth Banks is fully in an episode of the original TV show.
And also, well, the most striking thing about Rita Repulsa, played by Elizabeth Banks, wasn't her overacting. It was the fact that the character seemed to fit more of a horror movie than anything else, with her zombie look and what she was doing to people and the way she was eating gold and turning it into liquid.
Yeah, a lot of character and monster motivations that made no sense. Like I said, the third act of this movie, like I said, is a dumpster fire because the third act is when it just abandons all hope of trying to take itself seriously at all and just goes full out episode of the TV show. The only problem is the effects somehow turn out worse than the TV show itself, when a majority of the TV show's fight scenes were stock scenes that they used from Japanese anime. So how they were they're even capable of doing that, I have no idea.
I'm not sure either. I mean, the film only cost, it wasn't that expensive compared to other Hollywood productions. But anyway, another problem was the Power Rangers don't actually put their armor on until an hour and a half into the movie, and the Zords aren't utilized until that an hour and 45 minutes. And also, the Zords look kind of ugly.
Yeah, the Zords don't look good. I could barely tell them apart. At least, at the very least, even though the costumes were bulky and kind of stupid looking in the TV show, at least you could tell them apart. In this one, I couldn't tell the Mastodon from the Triceratops, from the T-Rex, from the Sabertooth. I couldn't tell any of them apart because it was all so bland and flat color palette-wise. Nothing stuck out to me, and the CG was just such a mess and all over the face and in your face too that it was just distracting, and I couldn't enjoy the epicness of seeing the giant, once the Megazord is finally assembled, punch whatever the hell that Goldar thing was in the face, which I expected to believe that piece of shit CGI abomination was Goldar. Get the fuck out of here.
Yep. The finale seemed to border on Man of Steel style action, that the heroes recklessly destroy Putties, Rita's henchmen, and that's such a stupid henchman name that I'm surprised they didn't change that from the original show. I mean, the heroes recklessly destroy part of their town in order to stop the villain, and come on, surely some people must have died from the carnage. And at the end of all that, the citizens of Angel Grove are cheering them all. Another thing I didn't like was the fact that we barely get to know the town of Angel Grove at all.
Yeah, and Angel Grove is whereas Angel Grove was almost like a character in its own in the original TV show. Now, granted, I will definitely say that our opinions are probably a little bit different because I'm not as big a fan of the original TV show as you are. You definitely have developed a following, not just with the TV show, but also with one particular character that came out of that TV show, which is ironic because this is the one Power Ranger of the originals, well, not of the originals because he wasn't part of the original 5, that didn't turn up in this movie, that, of course, being Jason David Frank's Tommy Oliver character.
Yes, and Jason David Frank did make a cameo in the movie after Rita is destroyed, and actually that's really the only time in the film I felt a wave of nostalgia. I did watch a lot of episodes from the original show when I was a kid, mainly because of Toon Disney reruns. Also, he was the Red Zeo Power Ranger. For a time, he was the Red Turbo Power Ranger. And he was also the Black Ranger, and my favorite incarnation of the Power Rangers as a child, Dino Thunder.
Yeah, I watched a couple episodes of Dino Thunder, and I definitely enjoyed what I saw from that a lot. So that's our number 8, Power Rangers. Definitely the weakest superhero outing this year, and definitely not our favorites. So now jumping into our number 7, this is where we both punt, because my number 7 is vastly different from Connor's number 7, because my number 7, at least, I was at least a lot more dissatisfied with than with Connor for more reasons that are particular to me. So my number 7, at least, is Spider-Man Homecoming, whereas Connor's, on the other hand, was
Justice League.
Yeah, both wildly different opinions on this, so I'm just going to graze over my thoughts on Spider-Man in terms of what I didn't like. So, first off, what I did like, I like Tom Holland in the movie, continuing off of the success that he had in Civil War. I think that he is at least my favorite Spider-Man yet, because he's finally the one that captures the essence of Spider-Man that was missing from both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's performance, and I love Michael Keaton as the Vulture. He is absolutely spectacular, and most definitely the best MCU villain that we've gotten since Loki. The problem is that because this movie suffers from having 6 different writers, it feels almost like 3 different TV show pilots crammed into one. This movie has obviously a lot of elements of John Hughes. The problem is that they stick out so badly that literally, there's even a scene where he's running past, he's running through a series of suburbs, and obviously a very obvious homage to Ferris Bueller, and literally to the point where the movie is trying so hard to shove in your face that it is a Ferris Bueller ripoff that they literally have him run past a TV screen that is playing Ferris Bueller's Day Off. We'll talk more about this once we get to Spider-Man's ranking on your list, but so just kind of run through your thoughts on Justice League and why it's as low as it is on the list for you.
Now, for the record, I didn't hate Justice League, but really disappointing and underwhelming. Now, what I did like, I had no problem investing in Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman because her character in the DCEU has been the most developed, and after seeing 3 or 2.5 movies, well, counting Batman v Superman, that awful piece of shit, she has sold me as the character. I honestly think she's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine good, and maybe even Chris Reeve as Superman good. Also, Ben Affleck as Batman, I think that portrayal was improved a bit from Batman v Superman, in which he was killing people violently left and right. That's not present here.
For no reason, I would like to add.
Yeah. Basically, all of the actors playing the superheroes were good. Jason Momoa is Aquaman. I kind of dug that punk version of Aquaman, different from the Aquaman incarnation that people usually make fun of. Ray Fisher as Cyborg was fine, but I think he was the least interesting of the superheroes. Ezra Miller was funny as the Flash, and Henry Cavill, I think his acting was weakest when he was first resurrected. That callback to Batman's "Do you bleed" line still leaves me cringing, but I think he kind of nailed the whole Superman charm when he fights Steppenwolf at the end.
That was missing from those first 2 movies that he was in.
Yeah. Also, the action was entertaining for the most part, I guess, and I did get a little giddy hearing the Superman and Batman themes by John Williams and Danny Elfman, respectively.
All right, so that's our number 7 spot. Like I said, kind of more grazing the surface. We'll break into more of those movies once we get to it, each on our respective lists. So now jumping into our number 6s, this is another one where I believe it differs for us, because my number 6 is Thor Ragnarok, whereas your number 6 is...
Actually, it's the same.
Oh, never mind. There we go. Perfect. So Thor Ragnarok. So we can talk about this one. This was a movie that we both came out of that is kind of another in a string of movies for us, at least during this time of the year, that everybody else seems to love, and we are just missing what it is that people are loving about it, because this was a movie that I had a lot more hope going into it once I saw those first couple trailers, and after coming out of it, I was very, very disappointed in the outcome of this movie.
Yes, so was I, and that's because it pretty much felt stale.
Yeah, stale, unoriginal, feel like we've seen it before. Like, I can appreciate this sort of weird direction that Marvel's going in with some of their solo movies in order to try and make them more straight-up comedies rather than, kind of quip machines, because they're trying to avoid the critical backlash of Age of Ultron. But in my opinion, it really kind of does this movie a disservice, because it's kind of a problem that I have with Guardians of the Galaxy, which I love that movie to pieces, but where you don't need to undercut every single potential drama moment with a joke. I understand making the movie funny, and there is a way to do that without undercutting some potentially very serious dramatic moments that do happen in this movie.
And also, this film, spoiler, I guess, involves the destruction of Asgard, a whole city, by a giant fire demon. That's not the sort of thing I would imagine one joking about.
Yeah, it's like the emotional impact of Thor and Loki, by the way, which this movie is kind of about the both of them, not just Thor this time, which I actually really appreciate because Taika Waititi does take the best part about Thor: The Dark World, easily the most bland and forgettable Marvel movie to this day, that being the chemistry and relationship between Thor and Loki, and really delving way more into that and what makes that tick. Also, obviously, the decision to make more of Loki more of an anti-hero rather than a straight-up villain, I've always found is amazing because Tom Hiddleston is a fantastic actor, and seeing Loki gets to stay around rather than getting filed off as yet another one-off Marvel villain is fantastic. But the point being that the two of them are watching their home be destroyed and blown up in front of them, and that being undercut by a joke, which of course is delivered by the director Taika in one of his many motion capture performances in the film. There's something kind of degrading and almost insulting about that.
I certainly agree. Like, it also slows the movie down and kind of ruins the pacing. Like when Thor is explaining to Valkyrie, Tessa Thompson, in a decent performance, says he's trying to clarify what he means about respecting women. It's unnecessary, and it's like, dude, we get it. Please shut up.
Yeah, it's one of those dumb little humor moments that you feel like it's almost like the movie stops in its tracks, literally just to hit you over the head with a joke in order to be like, do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get it? And that's one of those points where it's like everybody was saying, like, one of the biggest praises that this movie was getting is the fact of, oh, this movie seemed to be so much more self-referential and almost like making fun of all the Marvel movies that came before it. And I'm like, I would love to see the movie that you guys saw that in that, because I did not get the sense from this movie at all.
And also, and this is a personal gripe of mine, for all the times that Hulk was emphasized in the advertising, and while Mark Ruffalo still does a great job as both Bruce Banner and the Hulk is not as utilized as I thought he would be.
Definitely. And I will say that those Planet Hulk scenes are definitely my favorite in the movie, and the camaraderie and interaction between Thor and the Hulk after their first fight is absolutely fantastic. And Mark Ruffalo arguably does just as good a job in the motion capture as the Hulk, in addition to being of Interstellar again as Bruce Banner. I will definitely say I was expecting a lot more, especially for the Hulk in the last act. It's almost like he's completely forgotten about in that last act when they literally, what they do is they have him as a joke, of course, do the typical jumping off in order to spike the adrenaline and let the Hulk come out in order to defend the people of Asgard against the Fenris Wolf. He lands on the bridge, and it's a quick joke. It's just like, oh, it's going to take a few minutes for him to turn into the Hulk. He gets thrown away, and then he turns into the Hulk off screen, pulls the Fenris Wolf away from the people of Asgard and starts fighting it, and then it cuts away, and it barely cuts back to it.
Yes, and also one of the last trailers teased a great fight between the Hulk and the fire demon Surtur.
And that's another setup for yet another poorly timed joke.
Well, I don't remember the joke. I guess I'm glad about that.
Yeah, literally what happens is that it's the Hulk goes up onto the Bifrost, jumps onto Surtur and starts punching him, and then Thor's just like, Hulk, for once in your life, don't be an idiot and let's just go. And I'm just like, really?
Yes, and the Hulk is not an idiot.
Yeah, like, the one thing I will say is that this movie does do a great job in kind of, like, really exposing the Hulk as, like, really making him a child and using that for laughs, but not in, like, a really dumb, obvious way. Like, it actually is used to kind of, like, explore more of the character of the Hulk, who in the past has really just only been seen as this force for, destruction. So that's one of the positive things that I will say came out of this movie, is the fact that we finally got to see more of the Hulk as a character, not just Bruce Banner.
Yes, and the Hulk talks like one would expect the Hulk to talk, like, Hulk smash, puny man. Hulk do this. Hulk do that. Hulk love you.
Yeah, it's like little cute moments. Another thing that came out of this movie that people were praising it for that I, again, do not understand at all what they are seeing. Cate Blanchett as Hela, let me just say, for me at least, is yet another bland, generic Marvel villain. Like, yeah, okay, she looks like she's having a little bit more fun with it and putting like a tiny bit more personality into it. But again, she just is another one of these bland, I want to take over the world. And a lot of her motivation, it's explained to us and thrown at us at exposition rather than actually letting her, kind of be fully fleshed out as a character. And it's just kind of more examples of the fact of Odin is a complete and total asshole. And so because that is shoved at us within the first 2 seconds, we barely get any time to get to know her really as a character. And that kind of diminishes her overall value and presence in the film.
And also Karl Urban as Executioner. And a couple times I kept confusing Hela for Enchantress because that's how I usually associate Executioner, being Enchantress's crony. But the thing about Executioner is his arc is like this. He gets mad because Thor ruins his date with a couple of Asgardian girls. He joins Hela. He realizes what Hela's doing is wrong. Then he sacrifices himself. Big fucking deal.
Pretty much. And which sucks that they got such an amazing actor as Karl Urban for such a literal nothing one-off role, which because Karl Urban is a really spectacular actor, not just in the Star Trek reboots, but also for his tiny parts that he had in Lord of the Rings. That was a tiny bit part that really could have just been nothing part that he made his own, not to mention his amazing turn as Judge Dredd in the 2012 remake of Judge Dredd.
And his, I am the law, way better than Stallone's.
Yeah, definitely. And just to kind of wrap up on Thor Ragnarok, I will say, like I said, the Planet Hulk parts are the best parts about this movie. I will definitely say that the one part that I was worried about going in that actually did not make me disappointed coming out was Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster. I definitely thought that that was going to be like really kind of what they did with Independence Day Resurgence, where they just have him just like, oh, be Goldblum, but no, they actually like had him like embrace that inner weirdness and actually be a really interesting and funny character. A lot of the jokes around him were actually really well placed and didn't feel forced. So I will say Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster was thoroughly entertaining to watch. But yeah, so Thor Ragnarok, definitely we did not enjoy that as much as everybody else did. So now we're going to jump into our number 5s. And again, I believe that our number 5s are different because my number 5 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 versus which yours is
Lego Batman.
Which again is mind-blowing to me that you didn't enjoy this movie as much as I thought, but again, your opinion, all that. So again, we're just gonna graze over our points of kind of what we liked, and then we'll dive more into it once we get to it on each of our respective lists. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for me was a movie that definitely I liked a lot more than everybody else did, because a majority of the criticisms that were for this movie coming out were kind of middle of the road average to, there were some people who just straight up did not like this movie at all. I thought this movie was fantastic. I had such a fun blast and ride watching this movie. The fact of the sitcom feel of it, I know, is what kind of threw people off, and it actually threw me off at first, whereas the movie for the first 2 acts at least doesn't really have any sort of a plot or story. It's them kind of just bouncing around from event to event to event until the last act where it's like the big bad reveals himself and like, oh, they got to save the galaxy again. But I still had a really fun, enjoyable time. I think James Gunn's sensibilities and styles are still perfectly at home with Marvel's. I love seeing all these characters again. They all do another spectacular job here. Also, the new additions, for me at least, bringing in Kurt Russell for the first 2 acts, he actually does a legitimately great job as Ego the Living Planet. Also, the arcs concerning some of the other supporting players who didn't get as much screen time in that first movie. That, of course, the primary example being Yondu, played by Michael Rooker, who does a spectacular job in this. Yeah, the third act is garbage. It's literally just throwing a bunch of CG at you, but the themes they cover of fatherhood, really breaking down, like I said, them kind of abandoning this whole story element allows them to go a little bit more character-driven, and despite the fact that that does diminish some of the action that some of the characters are able to do, I still get a lot of great, juicy character moments that I never possibly would have thought I would have wanted. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I will definitely say, was extremely underrated, and I think that it definitely deserved a lot more praise than it got. So now, Connor, for you with Lego Batman.
Well, what I did enjoy about the film was the animation style, of course. I thought the voice actor performances were all decent. Well, more than just decent, really. Will Arnett, especially as Batman. I love how they, like, basically made him into, I don't know, a 5-year-old boy stuck inside a 30-something-year-old man. And the opening act was just brilliant. It was crazy, and it perfectly makes fun of how Batman is just able to defeat everyone, and him, like, declaring how awesome he is. They throw references to nearly every Batman incarnation. The Adam West show from the 60s, they showed clips of that. The Tim Burton films, the Joel Schumacher films with bat nips, and the Chris Nolan films, and of course, my least favorite superhero movie of all time, Batman v Superman. Alfred referred to all those as different phases, but still. The action was great. I found it funny that Joker, like, he's like, oh, Batman doesn't hate me. I gotta get some other villains to prove to him that I'm his greatest enemy, that I mean something. That was just great. And I kind of wish the film had mainly just been about that. Because, like, my problems with Lego Batman movie, I mean, I'm fine with the character arc of Batman realizing that he needs relationships in any form, like Robin being his adopted son and his main sidekick, and Batgirl being a woman in his life, although they don't exactly end up as a couple. And of course, Alfred being the closest family he has. But if only the film wouldn't beat me over the head with it so much. I mean, like, every 10 or 15 minutes, character is telling Batman, you've got to have some relationships, man. And Batman keeps, and he knows that the other characters are right. And he just keeps denying it. Like, please, Batman, just admit it. It's getting old.
Right, so those are our thoughts on our number 5 spot. Now, jumping into like I said, we are going to break down all of these different movies once we get into his spots on the opposite person's list. So now, jumping into my number 4. Now, my number 4, again, is going to be a very controversial pick because, again, it is a movie that I really thought I was going to hate going in. That's the thing. It's really interesting what happened with my number 4 is Justice League, by the way, with going into this movie versus coming out of it, where going into this movie, I had absolutely zero faith that this movie was going to be a good, especially when I heard about the whole situation behind the scenes with Zack Snyder and with his daughter committed suicide and him stepping off and Joss Whedon stepping on in order to complete the reshoots and all that. I was really, really even worried. I was still convinced this was going to be the worst movie of the year. And coming out of it, I actually have to say I was impressed because compared to what we got before with the double whammy last year of Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad, 2 of the worst superhero movies I have ever seen, this movie really thoroughly impressed me because I thought that they actually really took the time to set out and explore each and every one of these characters and make them fully fleshed out characters and not just rely on cool visuals and an overcomplicated story in order to try and sell this movie. And I actually really appreciated that.
If by explore you mean 1 or 2 scenes that basically say who each character is, that's kind of my problem. Yes, you could say we got just enough to know who they were, but honestly, and I guess the film did succeed in what it set out to do and making me excited for most of the characters being in solo movies, except Cyborg. He was the least interesting, I think. But honestly, the film had a lot of problems, I think. I think we can both agree that the CG was ass.
Yes, we both agree with that. That's the one thing I will say is that I'm like, yes, I still absolutely agree with the criticism. The CG is absolutely garbage. The villain, obviously, Steppenwolf, poor Karen Hines getting completely 100% wasted in that role. Generic as hell. Guy literally looks like a reject Mortal Kombat character. There was also the fact that there was no reason to make that guy a CG character, and the story is nothing we've seen before. It's the whole Mother Box storyline that they used from the first issue of the New 52 line, except we've seen that type of story and setup used a million times before, so that much here's the thing, though, and I think the reason why that doesn't affect me as much as it does everybody else is the fact of I could have figured all that stuff out for myself going in, because obviously I read that storyline. I know how similar it was to the Avengers, so that much didn't bother me. So I guess in terms of going in, I really was only looking for, okay, I really don't care about the story because I know exactly what I'm going to get. What are they going to do with these characters to actually make me invested in each and every one of them that the DCEU has been unable to do so far? And in that sense, I would say they succeeded.
Well, honestly, I think if any character got served really well, it's Superman. Because, they resurrect him and he fights the Justice League for a couple minutes, so that doesn't really matter much. Although his arc of, getting his humanity back and realizing who he is again, that's kind of rushed through. You see, this is the kind of problem with reshoots and multiple directors. And
not just multiple directors, but also the fact that the studio literally mandated this movie is not allowed to be over 2 hours. So that's definitely a scene that got cut, a result of which got left on the chopping room floor.
And I find that a bit of a problem. Also, while as I said before, Ezra Miller is funny as the Flash, not all the humor worked.
Definitely a few cringeworthy lines. I will definitely admit that Batcave line was really dumb. But in terms of setting up new players for not just this movie, but also to see them in future movies, this movie made me excited. Obviously, before this, Gal Gadot was really the only one that I was interested in because of how spectacular she was. The best part about Batman vs. Superman, and also how spectacular she was in her own solo movie. But this movie made me excited to see Ezra Miller as the Flash, especially considering the fact that I had already had a good solid version of the Flash on the CW's TV show that had destroyed any other version of the Flash that I would potentially want to see on the big screen. So seeing Ezra Miller as the Flash actually work as well as he did, I like that. I like seeing Jason Momoa as Aquaman. And unlike you, I actually really liked Ray Fisher as Cyborg, mostly because him as an actor, I had no idea what he was like, because at least I knew who Ezra and Jason were because I'd seen previous projects of theirs. But with Ray Fisher as Cyborg, I had no idea what kind of presence and charisma that guy was going to bring to Cyborg, and seeing what he did, how much actual personality he brought to that role, despite all the terrible CG that was covering him up. I actually thought he did a really good job of the role. Agree with you, though, I definitely still would not want to see a solo Cyborg movie. Nothing against the character in total. It's just that Cyborg, to me, was always a guy that would function better as a side character like Hawkeye in the universe rather than getting his own solo movie. But still, I liked seeing all those characters. And going back to Superman, literally for me in this movie, Joss Whedon was able to accomplish in this movie with Superman in a few scenes, not even a whole movie, a few scenes, what Zack Snyder was not able to accomplish in 2 feature-length movies, which is giving him some actual friggin' personality.
And make him an actual hero.
Yeah, like, he likes saving people. He's having fun. He's got the one-liners. You see that back and forth with him in Cyborg. You see him crack a smile. And yes, I know the criticism is there about the CGing off the mustache. Yes, I think it is just as dumb as everybody else's did, and there were 1,000 more cheaper options. But still, just getting to actually see a good version of Superman on the screen, it was so nice to actually see. So, again, all of those reasons are for why Justice League makes its spot here as high as it is. And just in terms of, like, the overall criticism going back to it, I really thought that this movie was going to be, like, much more well-loved and that I was going to hate it. But it actually kind of turned out the opposite, where I liked this movie apparently more than everybody else did. Like, people hated this movie coming out. Like, absolutely hated. Some even more than Batman vs. Superman, which I didn't even know how that was possible considering what a mess that movie was. But, yeah, so now, Connor, what was your number 4?
That would be Guardians 2. Some of the good things that Guardians 1 brought to the table, like, for instance, the music video-style action sequences, especially when Groot, or Baby Groot, I should say, Rocket Raccoon and Yondu are walking down the hall, and they're just taking out baddies left and right. And Yondu's death was one of the more emotional moments in the MCU.
The most emotional moment in the MCU.
Yes, there have been others, but that's beside the point.
Such as?
Well, Coulson's death, and I'm not even going to talk about the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Undercut by Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but...
And as even Joss Whedon doesn't admit that there's a connection between the two.
Yeah, but that's not because of Whedon. That's because of the feud between Feige and Perlmutter, but that's beside the point.
Yes. And there were some good jokes. The actors still did a good job, but like you said, Dominic, lack of story and also a little too much humor. And, of course, as you noticed, I probably only laughed as much as I did in the theaters because the characters themselves were laughing. And then when you look back and realize that it's not as funny as it sounds.
Well, I definitely will admit that there was a little bit of an overabundance of humor, much more so than the last one. And I will definitely say they put a lot more of their emphasis on comedy this time rather than a lot of the, I'm not going to say serious drama, but like definitely emotional stakes. But just in terms of kind of continuing with the trends and themes that were set up in the first one, where the first one, it's all about, you know, how his mother influenced him, and how this one, James Gunn focuses more on the relationship with his father. I thought in terms of what James Gunn was trying to focus on, and in terms of kind of like differing from the overall plot and story of the MCU, he did a great job.
Yes, true. I was also disappointed with part of the final action sequence, which just had Star-Lord and Ego flying in the air, punching each other, Man of Steel style.
Although that Pac-Man scene was pretty freaking hilarious.
Yes, it was, but other than that, they were just punching each other in the air.
All right, so no, I'll give you that. Like I said, that third act, that CG getting thrown in your face when Kurt Russell, who, like I said, does a very good job for most of the movie, is literally turned into generic Marvel villain number whatever with all that CG around him. It is very disappointing. But overall, like I said, still a really solid, enjoyable flick that I feel like really does not get enough credit that it deserves.
Well, it was a good watch. I don't know if I'd want to see it again. That's the problem with a lot of Marvel movies. They're not very rewatchable. But anyway, want to get to our number 3s?
Yes, so our number 3. So this is where we get into the upper echelon. Now, number 3, again, your number 3 is going to be very, very different from mine. And just in terms of, like, your number 3 is a lot higher than my number 3. So my number 3 is Wonder Woman, and yours is
Spider-Man.
So just breaking down just how fantastic, and just with the situation with Wonder Woman, it wasn't necessarily that the movie was great, because looking back, the movie really is not as great as everybody says it is. It was just more so, it was refreshing. It was a breath of fresh air, considering the 3, in your opinion, dismal, in my opinion, not as dismal, because I like Man of Steel a lot more than you do, installments in the DCEU that we've gotten. Just, it really was going old school in terms of, like, old school superheroics. And like I said, the period piece definitely helped that. But what I mean by when I say old school is it felt very like, it was nice seeing a character who actually wanted to save people, a character who actually cared. And I thought, hiring Gal Gadot for Batman versus Superman, like she was only, despite the fact that she was great in what we saw, we only saw her in about 10 minutes of the movie, so we couldn't really make a judgment until we saw her in her solo movie. And in her solo movie, she knocked it out of the park. I thought she was absolutely spectacular. Every single minute that she was on screen was an absolute joy to watch. Still seeing that No Man's Land scene, seeing her walk up for the first time was like that sent chills down my spine. That was something that I had not seen from a superhero movie in a very, very long time, and it was just so nice and refreshing to see that. Problems with the movie, yes, I do. I do have a problem with the Amazonians. I do think that it was a mistake to have all those other great actresses do the accents to imitate Gal Gadot, because the problem is that they do have a really fine bunch of actresses for her family on Themyscira. Obviously, Connie Nielsen as her mother, Hippolyta, and Robin Wright as her aunt, Antiope. And the last act, like I said, I have a much larger problem than my friend here does with the villains. I think the opportunities surrounding her half-brother, Ares, played in the film by David Thewlis, are completely missed. I think the other two villains in the movie are completely laughably bad, but we'll talk more about that once we get to Wonder Woman on your list. But so, Connor, talk about what you liked about Spider-Man.
Now, while I still think Tobey Maguire is the best Peter Parker and Spider-Man for me, by the way, being a great Spider-Man is not just all about telling jokes.
That's not what I meant when I said that.
Tom Holland still does a great job with the character. He actually seems like a plausible high school Peter Parker. And the film perfectly emphasizes how difficult it is to balance being Spider-Man and having a high school life. I mean, they sort of did that with Spider-Man 2, but that was more than high school. He had graduated at that point, balancing college, having a job, and seeing his Aunt May and such. But Homecoming did a good job of showing how difficult high school can be when you're Spider-Man. I mean, missing out on a spelling bee contest, doing things that cause you to wind up in detention. And of course, there was some good action too, and I agree that Michael Keaton is a great villain, and I'm happy that Marvel is actually taking the opportunity to pick out more Spider-Man villains than the obvious ones like Green Goblin and Doc Ock. And of course, Robert Downey Jr. is in the film as Iron Man, and he plays a good mentor role, and he is actually the one who tells Peter the main message of the film. If you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it, which at first may make it sound like Iron Man 4, but it isn't, really.
Yeah, that's what I will say, is that Downey Jr.'s involvement in this movie I was worried about from the trailers, but I will say, so Downey Jr. is only in this movie for about 4 scenes in the movie, and what I'll say is that I have a thought on literally each one of the scenes. So the first scene that he's in, which is kind of the opening scene, I'm kind of indifferent to. I'm like, okay, it's just kind of just to show the transition from Civil War. It's kind of a nothing scene. The second couple scenes that he's in are really kind of whatever, like the scene where he rescues Peter, but he's in India while it's just the armor being set. I feel like that's kind of like a jackass move. Now, what I will say is that scene where he does fix the ship and he's talking with Peter and kind of schooling him and just like, yeah, if you're nothing without the suit, that scene is actually a really, really great scene. The problem is that the trailer literally spoiled that scene for us, so you miss kind of the emotional impact of that because you've already seen it. And then the last part where he's talking to Peter in the Avengers Upstate Mansion is absolute garbage. I think the inclusion, just throwing Gwyneth Paltrow back in there as Pepper Potts, is, for me at least, a complete jerk off, especially with the great emotional setup that you had with Tony and her breaking up in Civil War. So I absolutely despise that last scene. But overall, just my problems with Spider-Man are not just the fact of the movie, for me at least, despite the fact, yes, it does have some great high school moments, and seeing both him in detention and him going through all the problems of that a typical high schooler kid would go through is something that we kind of miss in all the other movies, both between the fact of, A, he's barely in high school for both versions of the earlier 2 movies, and also the fact that he is a 30-year-old man playing a high schooler, so that was already distracting. So you have those 2 things going for it. The problem is that it literally, there are parts in this movie that feel like he's literally just being thrown from event to event to event to event to event that just seem to be convenient for the plot. And also there's the fact of, for me at least, it's the talent in this movie, because unlike my friend here, I am very familiar with a lot of the great comedians that they have for this movie that are literally just wasted in these tiny one-off bit part roles that I really don't understand. It's almost like they literally just pulled all these guys out. and just like, hey, you want to be in a Spider-Man movie? And they're like, sure. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to have you in literally 2 scenes and you're going to crack one lame joke. And they're like, okay, I'm serious. Donald Glover, Hannibal Buress, Martin Starr, what's it called? Not just comedians, Logan Marshall Green, Bokeem Woodbine, Marissa Tomei. In my opinion, outside of Holland and Keaton, every single member of this cast is 100% wasted. I think just the fact that the entire crux of Flash Thompson's character, Flash Thompson played by Tony Revolori in this version, is Penis Parker, literally makes him worse than the other 2 versions of Flash Thompson in any of the other movies, which those guys were barely even characters. And Zendaya, I thought her inclusion was total garbage. She almost didn't even need to be in the movie. I thought that half-assed twist with her being, MJ in the end was really, really dumb. And unlike you, I definitely think that whenever the battle sequences happened, they were fun enough to watch. But the problem is the CG was so awful that it was completely distracting. Like that last fight scene with him versus the Vulture was terrible, which sucks because in contrast, the character moments between Tom Holland and Michael Keaton, some of the best in the movie. That scene where they're in the car, first off with the twist when Peter finds out that the Vulture, Adrian Toomes, is his crush's dad. That's easily probably like the best part of the movie. And then it's followed up by that amazing conversation that they have in the car where he literally freaking pulls out a gun and points it at him. And it's just like, yeah, you saved my daughter, so I'm giving you a pass this time. Come near me again, I'm gonna put a fucking bullet in your head. Like, that was amazing. And Michael Keaton and Holland are acting the hell out of that scene, and it's great. The problem is that, kind of to quote Mark Andreyko, and kind of to sum up my overall thoughts as to why I didn't like this movie as much as like my comrade here is, I wanted to see the movie that the actors thought that they were making, because every single one of these actors were definitely acting as if they were in a much better version of this movie.
Yes, I agree. Like, I was slightly disappointed. The film wasn't as good as it could have been. But for the crap that we've had lately, Amazing Spider-Man 2, I'll take what I can get.
Yeah, and that's what I will say is that all my gripes with this movie aside, it is still better than Spider-Man 3 and both the Mark Webb versions that we've gotten.
Yes. Still not as good as those first 2 Raimi films, though.
Oh, no, nothing's touching those. So that's kind of our number 3 spot. Now we're jumping into our number 2, and now we can kind of talk more about what was my number 3, because kind of your number 2 is
Wonder Woman.
And my number 2 is the Lego Batman movie, a movie that I liked a hell of a lot more than my comrade here, quite possibly because of how much I love the Lego movie before this. But Connor, I want to hear your thoughts on Wonder Woman before we jump into me spewing about how much I love the Lego Batman movie more.
Well, watching the film a second time over Thanksgiving break, I actually liked the beginning scenes in the mascara more. I mean, I could see that it was necessary to set up who Diana was. Like, the film starts with her as a little, well, doesn't start with her as a little girl, but when it flashes back, it does. But still, like, we need to set up what kind of world she comes from, like, who the people in her life are, and the stories that motivate her to do what she does. Gal Gadot, of course, is phenomenal.
Like, really, like, I cannot stress this enough. Like, Gal Gadot, like, literally, you were saying, you said before, Jackman good, quite possibly Reeve as Superman good, Downey Jr. as Iron Man good. Like, she is up there in, like, one of the best superhero castings I've ever seen. Like, that good.
Yes, and Chris Pine was actually a great use of a love interest, and it was really sad to see him die. I mean, the action was spectacular despite a lot of slow motion. It actually didn't bother me so much the second time around. And yes, it was just Wonder Woman being a real hero. She was careful about, like, how much property damage she was causing when she was fighting those Germans in that No Man's Land scene, and when she was fighting them in the town. She was really innocent. She was naive at times, and she was not afraid to stand up to those bigwigs in the war room.
But the thing about her naivety and her innocence is that it wasn't played up for laughs, which I really cannot give this movie enough credit for doing, is that it would have been so easy to turn her naivete around, like, the dresses, like when she's in the dressing room scene with her sword and her lasso, and then just the way that she talks to everyone. It would have been so easy to play that up for jokes and humor, and they didn't, and they used it in the best possible way, and they made that and incorporated that into her character in a way that made her an even more fleshed out human being, which is needed because she is half an Olympian god. She is even more powerful than Superman in some parts. So I really just love just how human this movie made her feel, which in essence is really what makes these superhero movies as great as they are, is breaking down what makes these people human. And that is, whenever this movie was doing that, it was on friggin' point.
Yes, and that No Man's Land scene, like, besides nearly every moment in both our number 1 choices, I have not watched a scene in any superhero movie that has sent chills down my spine more.
Yeah, like hearing that score, like just her, first off, just the way that it builds up to it, even before she even goes with the ladder, before she even puts on the crown, like when she shifts into the armor underneath the cloak, like when Chris Pine is just like, no, look, that's not what we came here to do. We didn't come here to save people. And she's like, no, that's what I came here to do. And when she, like, that is right back, like throwing it back to Lord of the Rings, Eowyn, Miranda Otto saying, I am no man. One of the best feminist moments we've seen ever. And then her walking up, obviously, yeah, the slow-mo's a little distracting, but just seeing her power on full range for the first time, but seeing it done in a way that is actually, like, emotionally beneficial. Like, every single punch, every single kick, it is earned, and it defines her. Like, she is this powerful warrior, and it works.
Yes. Now let's get to the third act.
The third act. That's what I was about to get to.
Or at least the final battle, let's say, because that's really all that you had a problem with in terms of the third act.
Besides the Themyscira parts. But yeah, definitely, like I said, the second act is the best part about this movie. But the third act, like I said, my problems with the third act are not necessarily with the structure and the plot. It's with the writing of the villains. Because the thing is that for the most part, the third act really, despite the fact that the villains are lame and cartoonish and acting like they're almost like in a completely different movie, the villains being General Ludendorff and Dr. Poison, played hilariously by Danny Huston and Elena Anaya. There is a great scene where Wonder Woman kills Ludendorff thinking that he is Ares, and there is this great cathartic moment where she finally has to accept the fact that that sometimes there is no one overall bad guy, that sometimes it's just human beings are shitty and they cause their own problems. That was amazing. And then they completely flipped that on its head by bringing in Ares in easily one of the most predictable twists of all time. Like, they actually kind of made the identity of the guy that Ares was posing as for most of the movie, like, somewhat of a mystery. And honestly, I'm like, yeah, I saw that coming like a million miles away, because he's the only one of these people that, besides the main core group, that they're actually keeping around. So I'm like, you kind of could have figured that out for yourself.
Well, to be honest, I didn't really guess that. Although it is kind of funny to see Professor Lupin in CG battle armor, to be honest. But anyway, as for the villains, like, I was fine with Ludendorff and Dr. Poison. Like, the use of such a name, Dr. Poison, is not as ridiculous as it may sound. Like, there have been people named Dr. Death.
Oh, no, my problem is not with the name at all. My problem is just with the way that the acting choices that actress made, just the way that character was written. I could care less about ridiculous comic book names, because I've gotten my fair share of those that I have not had a problem with in the past.
Yes, true. The way they act is a little silly. Although, I guess I appreciate a little that Danny Glover was having... Not Danny Glover.
Danny Huston.
Danny Huston. That Danny Huston, like, was having a bit of fun in the role. It is, of course, out of place. But what I will say about that final battle between Wonder Woman and Ares, though, yes, there's a lot of CG. Yes, Ares has some typical villain dialogue. But I'm willing to forgive all that, because Wonder Woman's character arc works. I mean, she wants to save humanity, convinced that Ares is corrupting them, realizes that human beings are acting on their own will, and then after learning that Steve loved her, or loves her, before he sacrifices himself, and of course this is in line with what the Amazonians believe, or the Amazons, I mean, Wonder Woman still has a resolve at that point.
And I will say that seeing Steve die and sacrifice himself, that was a legitimately heartbreaking moment. It's just seeing her reaction, and also like the PTSD almost angle that they take, where she can't hear him at first and then they flash back and it tells you what he is saying. Just like, I wish we had more time. I can save the world today, but you could save it tomorrow and for generations to come. My biggest problem with Ares, though, is not necessarily with the portrayal, because I think David Thewlis does a fine job. It is really sad to me that he is probably the worst part about two products this year, one of which completely ruined the project. But with his portrayal of the God of War Ares here, I actually think that for the most part, the movie is doing a good job with the idea and playing with the idea that we have in our minds of Ares, which is typically this big, blustering, like hulking force to be reckoned with. But rather this time, he's kind of more like the deceptor, the weak old man, the man behind the wizard behind the curtains, the one who is kind of manipulating it. I actually thought that was really cool. But then when they turn him into this big CG monstrosity at the end. It's like it's a complete subversion of everything that the movie is trying to go for, and it almost feels like a giant dump on this amazing and beautiful arc that they've had overall, because because everything, the whole point of Diana's arc is discovering that mankind is responsible for some of their own decisions, and despite the fact that yes, there may be somebody manipulating them, there is no one overall main bad guy, and just turning him into this big CG force for her to punch in the face and, you know, destroy with a lightning bolt, it kind of almost subverts and almost destroys any chance of an amazing arc, which sucks because it is a really amazing character arc that she is going through for most of this movie.
Yes, well, it kind of sort of destroys Ares' arc, but not hers. I mean, because the arc has been pretty consistent throughout the whole movie, and to just see it, like, to see Wonder Woman destroying Ares with a new resolve, yes, it is a typical comic book movie climax, but at the same time, because of her, it feels so satisfying. I love her character, her arc so much that I am willing to forgive that fault.
Right, and I'm glad that you are able to, but it's just the sin that is committed with Ares. It's just it's something that I cannot forgive. So now jumping into my number 2, Lego Batman, which is a movie that I absolutely adored. Now with this movie, it was kind of a situation of I was a little bit worried because you're taking the supporting player for a mega popular movie and putting them in the lead of their own movie. We've seen this now twice with animation with both Minions and Finding Dory, one of which was kind of mediocre, the other one which was a complete pile of dog shit. It's kind of called the Joey effect, where it's the same thing where you took Joey, who was mega popular as a supporting player on Friends, and putting him as the lead in his own series that ends up getting canceled after like a season and a half. But let me tell you something, this movie, once I actually saw it in theaters, threw all of that baggage that I had out the window, because this movie is hilarious. This movie, I love the meta angle, which again, I think is something that you may not necessarily have bought into, is just how ridiculous and over the top is. They were doing what good meta comedy is supposed to do, which is where they're making fun of something while at the same time exploring it in a new way that really hasn't been covered before. And that's what I really appreciated that this movie did. As I said, this is probably the best meta project that Phil Lord and Chris Miller have worked on without actually directing it.
Yes, well, I have no problem with meta comedy and subverting the Batman tropes. I just wish they did it in a more intelligent way.
See, that's the thing. I do think they did it in an intelligent way. I thought that everything that they did with Batman in this movie, I thought was amazing. And with your problems with it, I would definitely say it's just more so the way that they handled the character of Batman. But the reason why they're doing it is because they are playing it up for this exaggerated comedic purpose, which I absolutely love that they do that. I think the voiceover talent in this movie is so beyond good from everyone, not just from the main people. Obviously, Will Arnett, Michael Cera, and Zach Galifianakis are the standouts, but also from all the little like supporting players that they have in there. Like Doug Benson is like 2 lines as Bane, and he is absolutely, like, it's hilarious, every one of his lines. The opening scene is absolutely spectacular. They cram like literally 1,000 jokes into like one opening scene, and then when he's just coming out and he reveals himself and he's kicking ass and he's playing that stupid song and he's got that little back and forth with the Joker, just like, Superman is my greatest enemy. Superman's not even a bad guy. Well, then I would say that I've got multiple people that I am going up against right now. Like Will Arnett, how is it the fact that Will Arnett is a better Batman than Ben Affleck was in live action? That is astounding to me. And it's just the fact of they could have just easily sunk into with the humor angle, but this movie is a legitimately great Batman movie on its own, not just with exploring obviously what it means to have a family, but just kind of tackling just how lonely it is to be Batman in a way that I really haven't seen any of the other Batman films explore, not even the Nolan movies, which I've gone on record to say are some of my absolute favorite movies, not just superhero genre, but of all time.
Yes, well, I would say even the Nolan movies, especially The Dark Knight, I feel were more subversive. And also, I want to bring something up. Are you meaning to tell me that you think that characters explaining character arc and plot point to Batman every 10 minutes or so, you call that intelligent? That's something I would expect an emo 12-year-old to say.
See, that's the thing, is that it could have been delivered. It was the way that it was delivered, because it was told in an almost comforting, heartfelt way where you didn't necessarily have to enjoy it. I'm coming up with a terrible explanation for this, but the point being that it wasn't. I guess I would say that the same problems that you had, the same way that you're willing to forgive the third act of Wonder Woman, I'm willing to forgive some of the lines that they delivered in Lego Batman because of just how entertained I was the entire time. So that kind of took a lot out of me. So just to wrap up my arguments, I really enjoyed the Lego Batman. Extremely fun, entertaining outfit. movie. Why did I say outfit? So that's both of our number 2. So now to kind of wrap up this whole debate, we are going to dive right into our number 1, which we saw this movie together when this movie hit theaters. We both made a pact that we were going to see this movie because of how amazing it looked and just by how different these trailers looked. And when we saw it, oh man, we were floored because our number 1 favorite superhero movie of 2017 was none other than Logan. Holy fucking shit. This movie was awesome. Just from an emotional standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from just a demythologization standpoint, so many different factors that made this movie work, and just as beautiful as it was. Connor, I want you to talk more about this because you've obviously been much more passionate about this film version of this character than I could have ever possibly been. I've really only come around in the last couple of years on it, so.
I will start by saying I didn't actually start getting into the X-Men series until I was in my mid-teens. I watched the first film, liked it, but it took me a while to watch the others. I loved X2, didn't like X-Men The Last Stand. Now with the news about Brett Ratner, I have even more reason to dislike it. I despised X-Men Origins Wolverine.
For good reason.
If it wasn't for Fan Four Stick and BVS, it'd be my least favorite superhero film of all time. I really liked X-Men First Class. Thought it was a good return to form. The Wolverine I also liked, although that third act, of course, was trash. Days of Future Past, I think that's when the series really got back on track. Deadpool, of course, we both really liked. Apocalypse was,
trash.
Yeah. But Logan was something more. Like The Dark Knight, it didn't feel like a real superhero movie. It felt like an actual movie. One that, if you didn't know anything about superheroes, you would have no problem following. And of course, it's no argument to say that Hugh Jackman is easily probably the best thing about the movie. He's been the most consistently awesome aspect of the franchise since it started in 2000. He's never given a bad performance as the character, and here he just takes his performance to new levels. He's angry. He growls at children. He's frightened. He's scared of himself. He sees Xavier as a father figure, but reluctantly takes care of him. He doesn't want to take all this shit anymore. He is awesome. Patrick Stewart is Xavier too. He makes a great supporting character, one who was probably the closest thing Logan had to a father. And, by the way, I just want to say, it's funny how we know the character's real name, James Howlett, in the film, and yet we all call him Logan, because that's the name we identify with him. Stewart has a lot of great moments as well. His Xavier is an older one with Alzheimer's disease, it's implied. And he has a moment where he breaks down, realizes his own faults. Like, it's implied that his out-of-control mutant brain murdered all the X-Men. And it's really sad to see that we don't get a satisfying catharsis to his character. I mean, in a way, it's a suitable, fitting death, but it's a really sad one as well.
I will definitely say that Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart easily both give the best performances that they have ever given as these two characters, which I have so much more respect for Hugh Jackman, not just as an actor, but as a human being. Just obviously aside from being like an amazing actor, because I just saw Prisoners the other day, which is an absolutely amazing performance that he gives, completely snubbed by the Oscars that year in 2013. But just the fact that Jackman was willing to take a pay cut so that him and James Mangold could make this movie, to me at least, that just screams so hard that just how passionate he was about seeing this character done well and right and making sure that he got the send-off that he deserved. And really, after seeing just how great of a job James Mangold did with this movie, I really couldn't imagine this movie happening in any other sense of the way. I also have to give a major shout-out, not to Jackman and Stewart, who are the two obvious standouts here, who both gave, in my opinion, Academy Award caliber performances here. Stewart, I was thinking about it the other day, and I had a couple people above him, but in the end, I actually did end up bumping Patrick Stewart up to my number one favorite supporting performance of the year. But besides those two, Daphne Keane in the breakout performance as Laura. Yeah, she is a little bit annoying at parts in terms of she screams just a little bit too much, but she more than makes up for with her action sequences. They are absolutely badass. Her back and forth with Jackman is absolutely hilarious at parts, especially when she's screaming at him in Spanish and he literally just tells her to shut the fuck up. That scene is amazing. Boyd Holbrook is, in my opinion, completely underrated as Donald Pierce. Stephen Merchant also as Caliban. gets a lot of really great human moments with Logan that I feel like are very overshadowed because of how just how little he is actually in the movie. Just the fact that this movie was kind of like, and it was more than continuing on the trend of the rated R comic book setup that Deadpool had, but it was also just playing around with the ideas of, again, some of my favorite elements of superhero movies, which are what it really means to be a superhero, what it means to have these types of powers, and really what kind of a toll it can have on these people, because some of the best moments of this movie are when you see Logan in pain. You see that pus coming out of his body. You see him taking longer to heal. You see him taking shots and really suffering for them in a way that you never saw in any of the other X-Men movies before. And you see him like dealing with some really like awful human being. Like, he straight up tells this 11-year-old girl, yeah, I was thinking of shooting myself at one point just to put myself out of this pain. It delves so deep into character in a way that I have not seen done in any other superhero movie to this day. And it truly is. It's heartbreaking, especially with the way that the movie ends, but it's also really truly amazing to me because it shows that when it comes to these characters, they're not all fun and games, and it shows that there are people out there who are actually willing to not just take them seriously, but do them in a way that makes them as exhibits their best, their most human qualities, and their, by default, their best quality.
And something else I appreciate is the fact that director James Mangold utilized other types of movies to tell his story, like elements from them, like, of course, one of the obvious ones being the Western, in that Laura, X-23, and Xavier watch a scene from Shane while they're resting in a hotel room. It's the one where Shane tells Joey, there's no living with a killing, which is pretty much one of the main themes of the movie. And also, superheroes have been compared to gunslingers and westerns, the men with no names, like Clint Eastwood, for instance. At times it felt like Unforgiven, with a man who used to kill a lot of people, going on one last mission to help somebody. And also, it had the gritty action, and of course, there were the desert landscapes that one would expect from a Mad Max film. It didn't have the craziness of, say, Mad Max Fury Road, but it had the grit.
And it utilized it absolutely perfectly. So that's kind of a wrap-up of this list overall. Just some final closing thoughts. Logan, absolutely beautiful film. It unfortunately got bumped out of my #1 favorite spot of the year, but it is still going to stay in my top 10 for the rest of the year. This truly is a superhero movie for the ages. So I think, any closing thoughts on Logan?
It is one of the few superhero movies to make me cry.
Yeah, just from the brutality of seeing him murdered in the way that he was, and not him accepting it, but just like that last closing line too, of just like, it was a perfect bit of humor, while at the same time just like a perfect encapsulation of just like everything that he's done, is that this guy has been alive for so long, and it's like, so this is what dying feels like. It's, perfect.
And I just want to take a moment to say, and my colleague won't admit this, he didn't cry.
I did not. It takes a lot, though, for a movie to make me cry now, in retrospect, so that's kind of it. So we're going to work on a wrap-up of the November podcast. We were very glad to come in and record this again. So as you guys know, we're going to end this like we ended the last episode, which is we're just going to run through the movies that we have seen for the month of November, give it a thumbs up, a middle of the way, or a thumbs down. So going through my list first. So for the movies that I've seen this month, we have Thor Ragnarok, Justice League, Coco, Mudbound, Roman J. Israel Esquire, and 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Connor, which movies did you see for the month of November?
Well, just half of the ones you saw: Justice League, Thor Ragnarok, and Coco.
So for our rankings, so Thor Ragnarok, I think we can both give kind of a middle of the way, almost thumbs down, not quite, but pretty much.
Or a marginal thumbs up for me.
For Justice League, for me, that's a middle of the road, because again, there are elements of that film that I still really enjoy.
Thumbs down for me.
Coco for me, and again, controversial opinion. You can look at my YouTube videos if you want further proof. Big thumbs down for that movie. Did not like that movie even a little bit.
And while it had its flaws, thumbs up for me.
For Mudbound, which is the Netflix original movie directed by Dee Reese. I actually surprisingly enjoyed this movie because it was a different type of, it wasn't straight up about slavery, and it actually explored a different era of U.S. history and kind of played around with some of the themes that we expect. So Mudbound, I actually give a surprising thumbs up. And then for the other 2 movies on my list that my colleague here did not see, Roman J. Israel Esquire was a movie that I have to give a marginal, middle of the way middle of the way, not quite thumbs up, because unfortunately, while Denzel delivers yet another amazing performance, the movie itself was kind of meh and all over the place. And the last movie that I have on my list, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, from director Martin McDonagh, the director of such amazing films as In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths, I give this film a big thumbs up. This film had some of the best performances of the year. I hope to Christ that Sam Rockwell finally gets his Oscar nomination for this movie. So 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And with all that being said, that is a wrap up of the November podcast. We will be back here in another month to not just wrap up the month of December, but to also wrap up the entire year of 2017. So Connor, where can the kids find you online?
My IMDb page. It's labeled Connor B. Balboa.
And as for me, you can follow me on Twitter at MovieNerd Review. You can also check out all of my reviews going back as far as 2015 on my website, MovieNerdReviews.com. And I believe that is it. So we will see you guys next time. Bye.